Okay.
Wow.
Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The Design Review Board public meeting of April 13th, 2017 is called to order. Please refrain from talking amongst yourselves and please turn off or put on vibrate all cell phones at this time. If you need to talk, please leave the meeting room. Anyone who wishes to speak, including applicants, on any of the applications to be reviewed today are asked to completely fill out one of those speaker cards provided at the table by the front door and to submit it to staff. You will be asked to speak by the board when your case is called. Anyone who wishes to be renoticed about a project in the event of a return for redesign decision by the board must completely fill out one of the postcards provided at the table by the front door and submit it to staff to receive notice of subsequent hearings. Current Design Review Board agendas are available by visiting our website at www.glendaleca.gov. A handout describing the procedures of the meeting, possible board decisions, and Design Review Board appeal is available from staff. Okay, in terms of a roll call, Board Member Benlian.
Here.
Board Member Charchian.
Here.
Board Member Simonian.
Present.
Chairman Malikian.
Here.
Report regarding posting of the agenda. The agenda for this meeting was posted on the bulletin board outside City Hall at or before 5 p.m. on April 5th, 2017. Oral communications. Discussion is limited to items not a part of this agenda. I have no oral communication cards, and I do not believe any were submitted.
No, neither do I.
Okay. Which brings us to the review calendar, and there are 3 items on tonight's agenda, and I'd like to turn the meeting over to Chairman Malikian.
Thank you.
Oh.
So, go ahead.
There has been a request made to take things out of order and to approve the meeting minutes
Yes.
from February 9th and February 23rd first before starting the 3 cases.
Do we need a motion for that?
We would, and if you'd like me
Can
to...
we have a motion, please?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of February 9th.
I'll second it.
Okay. In terms of a roll call, and forgive me, I don't see those. Board Member Charchian?
Yes.
Board Member Simonian?
Yes.
Board Member Benlian?
Yes.
And Chairman Malikian?
Yes.
The motion passes.
And we also have February 23rd, which 3 of us were here.
I'll move to approve the February 23rd minutes.
I second that.
Roll call, please.
And Mr. Benlian, Board Member Benlian?
Yes.
Board Member Malikian?
Yes.
And Board Member Simonian?
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes 3-0.
So, thank you. And now going down the agenda, is the applicant for Dearmont in?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, perfect. So we won't take the agenda out of order, so we will continue on. So,
Well, the applicant is, but not the architect.
The architect's not.
The architect is not here yet.
so what do we do? I mean, do you want us to, we're going to have some design questions. I think we should wait until the architect gets here. It would be the applicant's call, so it's up to them. So,
He's in the parking lot.
okay, then why don't we just start presenting the case? So let's go ahead and do that, and then we can see where we are.
Present slowly.
Oh, okay. Too much. Are we ready then, or are you reading the description? Okay. Okay, this is case number PDR 1702018, located at 1819 Dearmont Road. The applicant is requesting to demolish an existing 3,233 square foot single-story house with an attached two-car garage, which was built in 1962, and to construct a new 4,802 square foot two-story house with a three-car subterranean garage on an 18,022 square foot hillside lot, which is zone R1R, restricted residential zone in the floor area ratio 2 district. The proposed work includes, as noted, the demolition of the existing house and garage, a new garage, three-car garage with a mechanical level of 1,577 square feet, a new first floor living area of 2,497 square feet, a new second floor living area of 2,241 square feet. There's also a new landscape plan that includes a pool, jacuzzi, reflecting pond, barbecue, and retaining walls. In terms of the existing property and background, the existing property is located in the Verdugo Mountains South neighborhood, which is a hillside neighborhood. Homes in this neighborhood were generally constructed in the 1960s through the 1980s. The street slopes uphill in front of the property. A variance was approved in 1963 to permit a mailbox and wrought iron fence in the public right-of-way. Lot line adjustment case number PLLA 1619618 was recently approved to allow the addition of approximately 1,250 square feet to the subject property, which was purchased from the adjacent property at 1807 Dearmont Road, in order to widen the lot width. Staff did update the survey list to show this change, but the project information map was done previously, so it's not reflected in that. The subject property, as noted, the lot size of 18,022 square feet is slightly smaller than the average of 20,471 square foot lot size along Dearmont Road and Cielito Drive. Lot sizes range from 10,525 to 287,932 square feet. The homes range in size from approximately 2,600 to 4,000 square feet, with the average home size being 3,215 square feet. The neighborhood survey consists of one-story homes. The average lot size, including the two larger adjacent vacant lots south of the subject property, is 42,254 square feet, and the average floor area ratio is 0.18. The existing floor area ratio of the existing house is 0.18. Also, the proposed floor area ratio is 0.27, with a total of 4,802 square feet of livable floor area. This is the maximum allowed for this property. There are no protected indigenous trees on the property. In terms of site planning, staff believes the proposed site planning is appropriate, as the house is meeting the current code-required setbacks, 15-foot and 10-foot interior setbacks. The driveway, more or less, will remain in the same location, keeping the neighborhood pattern. The landscape and hardscape plan is complementary to the building design. In terms of mass and scale, overall, the impact of the second story, staff feels, is mitigated by cutting the structure into the hill to lessen the appearance of mass as seen from the street. The structure will appear as 1.5 stories from the street. And the proposed top of the roof of the second story is 2 feet 6 inches above the top of the roof of the existing. It's higher, 2.5 feet higher than the existing single-story residence. The overall massing of the house follows the natural topography of the site, as the proposed structure is 2 stories at the top of the site and steps down to a single story at the lower end of the site. In terms of design and detailing, staff believes that the proposed exterior building materials are of high quality, which include smooth stucco, stone, steel, and wood, which reinforce the mid-century modern style of the house. Staff has recommended approval with no conditions. Staff did receive a letter in opposition to this proposal, which you did receive in your packet. I believe that's all I have. If you have any questions.
Okay. Do we have any questions for staff?
Mr. Chair, I have questions.
Yes.
for staff.
Please.
The entire site treatment here is to dig into the hillside to lower the plate height of the first story in order to reduce the appearance of height from the street. However, I don't see any information on cut and fill on the hillside property, which is in our purview. So, in fact, I think what it states that there is no slope or grading issue. So that doesn't jive for me. So can we get some information as to what exactly is the movement of earth on this project?
The architect was going to provide that information. So.
And Mr. Chair, I don't feel comfortable moving forward without that information.
Okay. And
There is an error on the staff report about no grading proposed. Obviously, there is grading proposed, so hopefully the architect will have that for you.
So is the architect here? Okay, then what we're going to do is we're going to continue this, and we will temporarily put a hold on the project and move on to the next project. And then if the architect is here, we will come back to this, if that's okay with everyone else.
It's a hillside property. We're talking about a large volume of dirt. We need to.
Yeah, we're going to have some design questions, so
There's a
I mean,
lot of
the
design.
architect. So okay, then we won't have staff repeat this again, but we haven't opened the public hearing, so we can go ahead and do that. So let's move on to the next project for now, Idlewood, and then we'll come back to this. You gotta do something.
So this next project before you is located at 1443 Idlewood Road, case number PDR 1704989. The project is the demolition of the existing one-story house, was the one-story house, which was 1,754 square feet in size. And now the new house will be 2,348 square feet. It will remain one story. And it will have a attached 504 square foot garage, two-car garage, on the lot, which is 7,858 square feet. So the work includes, again, the demolition of the house, the construction of a new home, and in terms of materials, it will be an off-white color, similar color for the windows and doors, mission tile for the roof, stucco finish, and new landscaping with the pool. Little background, which is noted in your staff report. The original house was constructed in 1938. The applicant did receive back in June of last year they had applied for a building permit to construct a 603 square foot addition and some interior remodeling of the existing house with the attached two-car garage. However, while the plans were in the plan check process, without the final building permit issued, there were modifications that took place above and beyond the scope of work. So that's hence why we're here today. Staff is recommending approval with conditions. It is located in the R1 zone, FAR District 1. And I'd like to just straight I'll jump straight to the comments or recommendations. And if you would like me to highlight anything in the body of the staff report as it relates to mass and scale and design, I can go ahead and go back to those sections. So the one condition that we are recommending is to modify the front entry to be a single door with side lights and of a style that is compatible with the overall architectural style. To simplify the roof plan to reduce the overall height and eliminate the raised roof line at the rear of the garage. Reduce the eave overhang to be more compatible with the architectural style, and to revise the vinyl windows to be a darker color in lieu of the off-white color that's proposed, or fiberglass window frame. We did receive several letters that you have been forwarded of neighbors in the area that, mainly based on my precursory review of the letters, they seem to have mainly the issues are related to the design and mass and scale perceived from the front. For example, the two-door style for the garage as opposed to a single door, the front entry tower, if you will, being incompatible with some of the other homes or more of the low-scale entries in the neighborhood, so on and so forth. So if you haven't done so already, I encourage you to please read those letters. And the panels are on the the plans are on the panel behind you. So would you like me to go over any of the comments or staff bullet points in the staff report? If not, I would conclude at this point my presentation.
Thank you. I think we have,
necessary.
I don't think it's fine. Do we have any questions for
I
staff?
just had one clarification,
We do?
Mr. Chairman. The home that was the 1938 home, there was no historic issues with that home, correct?
No, we actually had Jay Platt review the home, and it was determined that it's not eligible for state, local, or national register or of any historic significance.
And then one other just point of clarification. One of the emails that I read seemed to indicate that there was construction done or demolition done before there were permits of any kind issued on this property.
Well, that is correct, because the plans were in the plan check process without having received the final building permit approval. And during that time is when one would assume that that's when that took place. I mean,
Okay.
yes.
Thank you for the clarification.
Okay. So we're going to open the public hearing. And the first card we have is Arthur Israelian, the designer. If you can come up, you have 5 minutes. You can state your name and address, please.
Arthur Israelian. I am a designer of this project. My address is 35 West Colorado Street. It's in Glendale. The design of the house, we try to keep the appearance of the existing house with the new style. And there is some argue about the garage on the front, but on the rear of the property we have an easement and we have electrical pole over there, which is make us to put a garage on the front. The window, we kind of agree with that. We can upgrade the window and the color too. And overall the house, I think it's not so massive. And mostly the garage and mostly we put the garage on the front of the house because they have small kids, and the owner would like to go to the garage and go to the house direct from the garage. The rest of the, I think, anyway, we try to keep the in a style with the neighborhood and not go too inconsistent with the neighborhood. And most of the house was built in 1939 and is not comparable to new houses. It's almost 100 years past, and there is some new stuff, new material, which one we have to use it for the new houses.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any questions?
Yes, I have a question. You have a split level really between the garage,
Right.
the entry, and the overall home. What was the reason of providing such a split? Because in essence, you know, the house got a little higher,
Right.
and then now you have some
The-
small steps going from the garage to the living, but in essence, it's adding to the height of the house. So what was the mentality behind that, as opposed to having like a flat home?
We have a little bit grade over there. If you see on the left side, it's where lower grade. And to grade all that stuff, the lot, it wasn't make a sense. It's,
Take a look at the street view.
yeah, it's
It's the existing condition.
we try to keep the existing condition. It's with the slope, and the existing garage was lower, couple of feet too.
And what did you consider grading the site somewhat to flatten it, and to do some cut and fill to straighten that out?
No, actually, we tried to keep the existing condition of the lot, of the grade.
Okay, thank you.
There was some idea to make a split level in the house, but they have a small kids, and it's a little bit dangerous. We could reduce the size, the difference between the garage and the part of the house.
Any more questions?
Staff question, if I may,
Mm-hmm.
with the architect here. The two car garages required, I'm assuming.
2-car, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sander, Price, Bernardino.
Good evening, Board. My name is Sandra Price Berardino, and I am representing my family who has lived at 1451 Idlewood Road for 53 years and is 2 houses north of 1443 Idlewood, the property being discussed today. I know I'm not the only one here today who is missing Holy Thursday services right now, but we feel it extremely important to voice our concerns regarding the tragic demolition of the home at 1443 Idlewood and the new construction remodel that is being discussed this evening. Our family has seen the architect's rendering of the proposed new construction at 1443 and have many concerns as to the proposed new design. We feel this new design endangers the architectural integrity and the design heritage of Northwest Glendale, especially the 1400 block of Idlewood Road. We are very proud of 1400 block of Idlewood Road, as our block was featured as the centerfold with our camphor tree-lined streets in the book Glendale, Jewel City of the Verdugos, published by the Glendale Chamber of Commerce in 1995. And the centerfold is the 1400 block of Idlewood Road. And it was published in 1995, as I said. And I believe each of the design review board members received emails of the photos from this book, and were also emailed a black and white photo taken in the 1970s by a family member. Our family has several photos from 50 plus years ago that show that little has changed on the block, and those pictures look like they could have been taken today. Sadly, because of the happenings at 1443 and the blatant disregard for the architectural integrity of the neighborhood, it isn't the case anymore on that section of the block, and it breaks our hearts. In getting back to the proposed design, here are our 3 concerns mainly. Double garage doors. There are only 3 houses which include 1443 Idlewood Road, that have garages located in the front of the house on our block, and none of them have double garage doors. Front door of the house, we feel the double front door does not fit the look and style of the neighborhood and looks out of place. And finally, the roof, we feel the roof looks way too high as compared to the other houses on the street and in the area. Unfortunately, we must also point out, as you well know, that we're very distressed that the construction, the tearing down of the structure, apparently started to take place without any final approved building design in place. We, along with our neighbors, had to endure looking at a fenced-in construction area for the last 9 to 10 months in which no construction work was allowed to take place and has added to a messy and unkept look to our block. And a question that we have is perhaps when someone disregards the law and permit rules, are there any consequences? Just want to thank you for listening to these concerns and taking them into consideration, keeping in mind the historical and architectural beauty of our block and neighborhood when making your final decision regarding a new design. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is it T. Wiseman? Wiseman? Okay. Philip Keller?
Hello and good evening. My name is Philip Keller. I serve as the Northwest Glendale Homeowners Association's representative to the city's DRB and planning boards. I'm here to speak on behalf of the association's concerns with the proposed project before you at 1443 Idlewood Road. First of all, let me say to the applicant that we're actually glad to see that the applicant is not pursuing a two-story residence on this street. That was our most primary concern, of that scale of massing was not pursued, and we're very glad about that. That just about every other home on the street is one story. It's prevailing massing. However, we're concerned with a few areas of the proposed design. Number one, the proposed use of the vinyl windows. We strongly feel this home should instead use wood or aluminum clad wood casement or double hungs. Vinyl windows cheapen the appearance of the home, and they're in conflict with the prevailing material usage on this street. Number two, the wide double front iron doors. We also feel that this is not in keeping with the prevailing modest character of front doors and entryways on this street, and that a single well-proportioned front door would better enhance this home's design. Number three, roof tiles. We feel that the proposed S tiles are a poor substitution for a real full barrel clay roof tile with an under and over cup, which would further enhance the quality of this home. We're also a little concerned with the prominent front-loaded double garage door that's not really on that street character-wise. Maybe they can look into a single door with front-to-back loading for the cars as a possible alternative. Lastly, I'll mention it would be nice to see a slight simplification to the roof lines, maybe in an attempt to lower the height slightly. If they don't look at grading the lot, as Mr. Simonian had mentioned, that might be a way to kind of ameliorate that issue. We support their right to build their dream home. However, we feel that with every construction comes the responsibility to do so with a design that's compatible to the surrounding neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. David Miller?
Good evening. I'm David Miller. I live on Bruce Avenue, just a couple streets away from this project. A couple things. One, as we discussed earlier, in my neighborhood, we all feel like, and I don't know if this is the purview of the DRB, but we're rewarding the guilty. They didn't get the permits, and they went ahead and demolished over 50% of the building, and then it just sat there. And now they're getting their wish to demolish it and build something else. And what they're trying to build is completely inappropriate, in my opinion. According to municipal code, the intent and purpose of design review is, among other things, to ensure single-family design which is compatible with the character inherent within the surrounding neighborhood. This does none of that. Staff has already addressed the massing of the roof and the entryway, as people have already mentioned. Also the double garage. A few other things that I've made note of is all of the other houses on the street have exposed eaves or fascia boards of some kind. I think there's a couple colonial style that have boxed eaves, which is appropriate to that style of architecture. Nothing on the street or even in the neighborhood has this sculpted stucco soffits that is on this house. So that doesn't go with any of the architecture of the area. The windows, vinyl windows, that was already discussed, but their use of bay, they have a bay window in front. All of the bay windows in the neighborhood and on that street have its own distinctive delineated roof, either a metal roof or a shingled roof, defining that bay. And all the bay windows have some kind of bar work or are lead paned. This is none of that. This is a very modern, open window, which doesn't fit with the rest of the bays in the neighborhood. And finally, the garage, although it's been discussed, according to the renderings, the front elevation of the property is 48 feet. That garage is 21 of those feet. The only part of house that we see is 17 feet 9 inches, and the entryway is over 9 feet. So it's mostly garage, which is unlike every other house on that street, and quite frankly, most of the houses in Northwest Glendale. And then again, on the drawing, in order to accommodate this large garage, you've got the large driveway. All of us in Northwest Glendale have the very narrow driveway aprons. Whether we like it or not, that's partly what makes the neighborhood unique and charming. This particular project shares its apron with the neighboring property. And the driveway apron on both sides of the neighboring property and this property have in the parkway a mature city-owned camphor tree that this owner would have to remove in order to accommodate that driveway and garage. And the trees in our area are coveted, and they're they're fought for. We fight the city all the time to keep them in good shape and keep them standing. So that would be something else that the owner would have to deal with, is removing of that tree. I think that's all I have to say. Everything else that I wanted to say has already been said. So,
You have a question?
I have a question for you,
Yeah.
sir. Since you're a neighbor and you mentioned trees, I was there at the property this morning, and there was a heavy amount of mulch in the green belt area that would be city-owned property next to the sidewalk. Was there another tree at that location, do you recall, in the past?
there may have been. There's probably residents of the street that know better than I.
I think I'll
from time to time trees do get removed.
Those people that came up.
But there is a mature tree standing directly right next to the current driveway apron. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Is it Les Halpert? You can answer the question if you can state your name and address.
Les Halpern, and I live at 1450 Idlewood Road, which is a couple doors to the north and diagonally across the street from the property in question. Good evening, Board. Glad to be here. First of all, Mr. Conkin, I'll answer your question. There were multiple trees along the street. A number of them have been removed for disease and other issues. There are two in front of the subject property. The one to the north was removed due to disease about a week ago. The one to the south was trimmed and was stated to have been in good continuing condition as long as it's taken care of. That is the one that would be needed to be removed to accommodate the driveway in question. So, like's been said before, I think we would strongly fight the need to remove that tree. We do value our trees. My other comments pretty much have been covered before. There's two additional things that I would like to say. The homes on the street are all unique. There's a number of unique features to each one. Our house at 1450 and the house same side of the street just to the south of us were both done by the same architect. And when we talk about door entryways, this particular architect was noted for designing entryways that did not actually go directly into an entry. In other words, everything's an angle. If you look at our house at 1450, if you were there this morning, you'll see that the walkway comes up, the door is at an angle, and in fact, when you walk into the house, you're not walking into directly into a hallway, an office area, a living room. It just kind of goes into almost like a little foyer, and then it angles off. The house, like I say, to the south of us has the same thing. It just confirms the uniqueness of the entryways of the homes on the street in this area. They're all different, and the entryway is not the focal point. And the last thing that I would like to comment to, and it's not directly something you have control over, but in the time between the demolition of the majority of the house in question and now, very soon after the demolition, there have been at least 5 or 6 coyotes that have taken up residence in the house. 2 are injured. They roam the street in the area. They're there all the time. Now, we know we live where the coyotes did, and they're not intruding on us. We're intruding on them. But to have the property open and have it be sheltered and not have any activity there to shoo them away creates a health and safety issue in our area.
Thank you. Carol Brusha.
Good evening, Carol Bruchet, 1400 Cleveland Road, just right around the corner.
And I'm sorry, would you mind speaking more into the microphone?
Yeah.
Thank you.
There you go. Carol Bruchet, 1400 Cleveland Road. I would like to see this home fit into this neighborhood of older homes rather than stand out. It appears to be too modern. I feel this house needs a redesign. I, too, am concerned about the vinyl windows. I don't think that's appropriate. The homes between Olmsted and Kenneth, between Bruce and Norton, are very unique. And they don't, I will admit there's one home that's up on, I think, Norton that's a little too modern, but the double doors, everything that I see with this design is just not neighborhood appropriate. And also, I know it's been brought up, we were, all of us, very upset when we saw that the house had been just hacked in half without a permit. It could have been fixed up. Basically, that could have been kept. What they have could have been kept, and the inside, the interior, could have been fixed up. I have been in the house. There's a lot of space to go into the back. Well, I know it's too late now, but I would like to see the vinyl windows replaced, and the house is a little bit too boxy. Thank you.
Is it Ellis Copley? Elise. So I apologize for that.
My name is Elise Copley, and I also live on Idlewood Road. And I'm opposed to the design of this house because I think it's not in keeping with the original character of our block. The roof is too bulky. I think the main issue is the big garage. When you see in the original photo, it was not a flat front house. There's a big setback between the garage and the living room where there's another part of the house in the entryway. This kept the house from looking like one big box, which is what the current design does. The other thing is the front door is too large and ornate for our neighborhood, and the roof is too bulky. It makes the house look like all garage. Finally, I'm thankful the house is not too big for the lot, but it is better suited to a new design tract and not for an existing neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Is it Suzek? Suska?
My email didn't go through. Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Uska. Again, I live on Cleveland, but I walk in this area. And I was just shocked when I saw that house. I looked it up on the city website and found no permits. So I concluded that the destruction was done illegally. This kind of behavior shows lack of consideration and disrespect for the neighbors, the community, and indeed the city and its regulations. rewarding such behavior with a permit will send the wrong message to others who may be considering doing the same thing. I would be very grateful if you showed some courage and did not reward non-compliers. Would you consider levying a fine for unpermitted work? Implementing Councilman Najarian's recommendations for a moratorium. He suggested a wait of 2 years before a permit is actually issued after something like this happens. And then afterwards, make sure that there are frequent and thorough inspections to make sure that non-compliance doesn't occur again. I think those who are considering building in Glendale need to receive a clear message that ordinances count and really must be complied with. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you. Is it Melanie Clark?
I want to say that hello, and I agree with everything
I'm sorry, your name for the record.
Oh, sorry, Melanie Clark, 1407 Graynold, one street over. I take a walk every day, and I was shocked to see this house had disappeared. And my main thing, I agree with everything everybody said, but really, there has to be some kind of, punishment or something for somebody who goes ahead and just destroys something without telling anybody. The people that did it and the company who they hired to do it, they didn't do it themselves. They hired somebody to do this. So there should be some kind of recourse. So that's basically what
They're here.
Huh?
Well, they're here now.
Oh, okay.
They're in front of us, and everybody has a say in it now. So
Yeah.
I think that is a recourse.
Well, but for the future, I mean, my block, we've lived there 25 years. I think the people next door have lived there over 50. And it's all the same. It's remained the same. If something like this happened on my block, I would be devastated. I mean, because that's why you live in Northwest Glendale.
Thank you. The designer would like to rebuttal? Yeah, you have 2 minutes. Yes.
Is there anyone else in the audience who wishes to speak before the designer comes in for the rebuttal? No one? Okay.
I think I have to text all of
There's
the...
one fellow over there, I think.
It's the owner?
Okay.
The owner? The owner is welcome to speak. We ask that he fill out.
We just need to have him fill out a card, please. He's going to be speaking. That's fine.
You
He
can
can
do it
speak
now.
and then afterwards. That's fine. He can, if he wants, he can, before you, I mean,
Okay.
he does have the option.
Hi everyone, my name is Armin, and I'm here with my wife. I'm a performer and I travel a lot, and just want to say to everybody of that permit stuff that you were mentioning. Like it wasn't. We didn't have a permit. It's not our fault.
You need to speak in the
It
mic.
wasn't our fault. It was just the problem of the contractor that we hired, and the guy they were doing some demolitions in the house. They went over, and when I came back, and it was a mess. So we didn't do anything purposely to do this, and we didn't want to, we just want to make a nice house for my kids, my wife, and maybe after 50, 60 years later, maybe we have another book of my house in there saying it's a beautiful house. And things change, years go by, and we're a nice family. And like I said, I travel a lot, and I know this area is a very safe place to live. That's why I can go buy houses anywhere I want, but I bought it here especially because it's my community. I live here from 9 years old, and I respect everybody. But, I just want to make a nice house for my family. And regarding to the coyotes, I know my neighbor is here, Arthur. He took care of that. He called the animal control. They came, and he did everything for me. And thank you, Arthur. That is it. Nobody did anything purposely, and I wasn't here. We weren't here. I was out of the country, and it wasn't our fault that they didn't have the permit, this and that. You know, I don't do this a lot. I don't make houses. This is not my job. I just bought a house and just want to, first of all, we were going to just remodel it and just live it in it. But so I didn't want this to happen. This is the story. And I don't want people to, you know, because I know someday we're going to come and live there. I want to have good relationship with my neighbors. I'm a respectable man in this community. Everybody knows me, and I love my family, and just want my kids to grow up in a nice neighborhood and go to nice schools. And like you see, you guys talking about the house here. Look at the entry; it's like the same entry, and the door is in the front. The garage is smaller. Not even one car can park in this garage. There's no way that two cars can park in this garage. And that's it. I just want to say thank you to everybody. I respect everybody's comments. And we didn't do anything in purpose. And I hope we can get this thing going and I can build my house and live my life. Thank you so much.
I have a question for you. You said that your contractor had started the work. Was the contractor that was working there, was he working with a permit, or was there?
We had a permit. Yes, we had a permit for inside jobs, for remodeling and taking off the what do we call that, wall things?
Maybe, yeah. So he can.
We had that permit, but they went over, and like I said, when I came back, and it was a mess. And
that's it. I just wanted to know if there was a permit that they were working under.
Just want to tell everybody here, I respect everybody, and nobody did anything in purpose.
Okay.
And this is not. I'm not a contractor. I don't buy houses and build houses to make a living. I just want to make a house for my family. Thank you so much, everybody.
Mr. Chair, also on that note, I'd like to clarify so that the audience knows as well and the neighbors. They did come in to the city in good faith to apply for a permit. They were in the plan check process, as I stated earlier. They did receive a DRB exemption for the request for that scope of work. We've heard now what happened out in the field. When it was discovered by whomever, whether it was the building inspector or neighbors, and that was brought to our attention, the applicant did once again come back in good faith to the design review board, applied for submittal for a design review board, and paid the double fees, which is not cheap.
Right.
I want to say it's more or less close to $15,000 that this applicant has paid. So all, again, in good faith to move this project forward.
Okay. Well, I'm glad that you cleared that up. Thank you. And do you have anything else to add? You need to speak. If you do, you have 2 minutes to speak. And if the owner can fill out the form.
Actually, we pull a permit for interior remodeling, and after that accident, we try to keep the same design and everything. Previous planner should know, the city knows how long it takes to. We did all the calculation for demolishing and everything, and tried to keep the project going on, but it was accidentally done more than it's allowed. That's why we came so long way, and
okay.
Employee is paying more for the mortgages and everything, and he's waiting for a long time.
Actually, I have a question.
You have a question?
And this is really for the designer. In light of all the comments about the height of the house and the mass of the roof, etc., in addition to the split grade that I had brought up earlier, I noticed that the living area has a 10-foot clear distance between floor and the drywall. And then next to it is actually a higher ceiling area. Is there any particular reason why you're kind of pushing the height in that area and then also doing a soffit above it as well, which kind of adds further to the height?
Actually, that one is not, it's just define the area, living area, and that divide the dining and living area, which is in one area. It's located in one portion of the house. To define just the living and the dining, that's why we make a difference between the ceiling height.
have you considered lowering the pitch of the roof to not have as much height, just literally make it less steep of a roof?
Actually, it's 3 to 12. It's minimum, whatever for the shingle or for the tile.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The public session is closed. Ms. Bentley?
Sure. When I was reviewing this project, it seemed to me like there are a few things that were going right and few things that weren't going right for the project. And the few things that were going right, you guys are following the footprint of the previous property. As mentioned by the president of the association or the association representative, that you didn't propose a two-story, which is a good thing. And you're proposing a moderate size. You're not proposing a big house. So that's also a good thing. Now, the things that weren't going too good for me, I think they're all addressed by staff, and staff did a phenomenal job addressing all these issues, as I heard from the people that opposing the project, they have the same issues, other than the permit issues, which the owner has clarified, so that's not a problem. Staff put conditions to fix most of these issues, which is the door in the front, the entry, the roof, to simplify the roof and try to lowering the height. And I think the only thing that staff didn't touch up, and the windows, and staff, I think, recommending to just change the color. I would say just change the material and upgrade the windows to something nicer than vinyl. And the only thing I think staff didn't talk about is maybe the garage door, which I agree with the comments that the residents brought up, which is going to maybe a one garage door. That's going to help a little bit with that load. Other than that, I think if you follow the conditions, I can support the project.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Mooney?
Thank you. There were a lot of comments made about really the process if someone goes through and illegally demolishes a house, etc., and what really are the options that are presented to us as DRB board members. And so I just want everyone to realize in the audience that this board really doesn't have the authority to say you're punished, so you can't build. That's not something that bestowed upon us. And if City Council wants to discuss that matter, they could, and then they would basically make an ordinance out of it, and then we would have to abide by that ordinance. So that is not an option that's presented to us. That's not an option that we could even discuss this evening. But I thought it was important to point that out because there were several comments that were made. It is important to also understand that if an applicant does go through the system and does things illegally, then they do have to come to DRB, where in the first case they were exempt from DRB. So they didn't have to come to this forum. But now they have to come to this forum and then pay the double fee, which staff talked about. So whether that's appropriate or not, or whether some in the audience might think that's too severe or not severe enough, that's not for us to determine this evening. What we are here to do this evening is to assess the design as presented and to try to either apply new conditions to it so it becomes more compatible with the neighborhood, or return it for redesign. Those are the options in front of us. And so I echo some of Mr. Billion's comments in that there are several things that the house is doing right. You know, it's one story. It's more or less occupying the same footprint of the previous home. Once you start occupying the previous home's footprint on a narrow site, majority of the frontage of the site is going to be taken up by a garage. And so it becomes very difficult to have garages placed in the rear of the site and a narrow site. Narrow property, I should say, without saying site twice in one sentence. So it's just the way things work out on these narrower properties. And so when we're looking at the overall site plan and layout, I think some of the conditions that are being conditioned, at least by staff or recommended by staff, are appropriate. And so I would recommend that the windows are upgraded. I would recommend that the front entry is redesigned. I think some of those bay windows, the bay windows on the side of the house and in the front of the house kind of have this Mediterranean flair to it that could be simplified, and it could maybe go a little more towards a contemporary Spanish, which kind of is still in line with what you're going for. And overall, it's just a matter of windows. It's not a matter of really changing the mass of the house or the scale of the house. It's just applying some new art design to the windows. I think that would fix a lot of the issues. The entryway will have to get reworked, but that's simple enough as is. The double garage doors I also agree with, and I asked a lot of questions about the height of the building and the way it's situated. We could reduce the height of the home, certainly by conditioning that the site is graded and lowered, but then you're going to have a lot of earthwork done in the neighborhood. You're going to have a lot of trucks going back and forth hauling that dirt away. So I'm not sure if that's the best approach either. And we could lower the interior space by a foot or something, but he's already at a 3 to 12 slope, so what is that going to get us? We're going to reduce it by a foot or more. So I don't think that's the issue. I think reworking some of the materials, applying some more details to the rafter tails will really begin to allow us to kind of keep what's presented here, but to make it a lot more compatible. So those would be my thoughts, and I could, we could discuss it some more after you guys speak as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I do agree with some of the staff comments, particularly the door. I think the door is too ornate and is in a style that is not conforming to the neighborhood. The iron doors just don't fit in this type of neighborhood. I think that the overall mass of this home is okay, but I have issues with the height. I agree with one of the speakers indicated that the S-type tile is not a very good fit, especially the Capistrano palette that they're suggesting. Seems to just kind of give it that track home kind of feel, and I don't think that that the homeowners are going for that, and I don't think that the neighborhood is deserving of that kind of a look. I thought that the attempt by staff, I'm assuming this might have been a staff condition, but to split the garage into two by having that center piece was trying to break mass, and I'm kind of confused because I heard a single garage door and agreement that a single garage door is the way to go. I am of the opinion that having that break in the middle kind of breaks into like two smaller garage doors and kind of gives the appearance of a older kind of garage. It also, from a functional perspective, because of the way that the driveway is laid out, that second garage is really not going to be as accessible because you'd have to make a sharp kind of right and then a left to enter because of the way that the cutout is. So primarily they're going to be using that one garage door if we leave it as two doors versus one. So that's kind of my thoughts on that piece. I think that maybe revisiting the roof tile material might be beneficial. Maybe the traditional Spanish full barrel would be something that would benefit this house. I would welcome input. I'm kind of lost as well. Is it a Mediterranean house? Is it like a new Spanish-style house? I think if we are going to condition it, we should condition some characteristics along one design palette, and I see elements of both here. The bay windows, especially the front off of a master bedroom, seems very I'd say out of place for the neighborhood, and so I would look for feedback on that as well. Okay. I agree with the comments that the white vinyl, off-white vinyl, is just not appropriate and should not happen.
Thank you. So I agree. I think one of one of the big questions that you just brought up is that we have to determine if this project we need to look at the style that they have chosen, being that it is a Mediterranean style, and majority of most of the homes that do have Spanish tile along that street is a Spanish revival. There's some ranch home styles. So the applicant has chosen to go in a direction of a more of a Mediterranean style. I think one of the biggest issues that I see is the amount of roof that we see from the street. Majority of the homes, almost all the homes that do have exposed or hip roof that is seen at the street level are all asphalt shingle. Mm-hmm. So the Spanish tile roof that we have, majority of them are, you see the rafter tails or they're gable. So I think by looking at this in a sense that, right now the current home that was there has the hip roof we need to, and they try to mimic that by replacing the lighter roof material to a heavier Spanish tile roof. So I think a study of a roof plan is definitely going to help. And I agree with you with having the two separate garage doors. I think one thing that can happen, they do have more than 25-foot setback there. So possibly one of the doors that can be in keeping with a more of a wood style or some sort of a material that they shift in plane. So one of them moves forward, the other one moves back, allows them to play with some of the roof. It has a different levels of elevations that are playing. But these are different things that can happen and should have happened to reduce the mass. By raising the roof, I think it add more volume, which is kind of unnecessary. But they could have gotten the ceiling heights, what they wanted, by maintaining the lower roof, but then creating, because they're building the whole thing as brand new, so they could have beefed up the roof structure and be able to and create that vaulted ceilings and other things there that, it would have saved them some height elevations. So in overall, I think there's room for improvement, but the big question is that are we accepting the Mediterranean style home that is in a neighborhood that is majority? If this project was proposed in more of a, I heard a lot of contemporary modern, but this is not a modern, this is not a contemporary. So I think a complete deviation of a style of architecture that it's there would have complemented the home being a complete unique style there, and as I would have been a lot more supportive rather than trying to match some of the materials that are in the neighborhood and trying to fit within the context of the surrounding homes. So having said that, I would like to kind of continue the conversation and see if we want to make specific revisions to the home and with the conditions and send it off, or have it come back and for us to see it again. And one quick question. It seems like a fairly steep driveway that I was there, but I'm not sure. I didn't really see that steepness of the driveway, and being that it's lowered and so forth. So I don't know, to be honest with you, if it's really we have an issue there or not.
Yeah.
But
with the gate and the construction gate and things that were there.
So I wasn't able to see it. So there's no survey. So I don't know if it was high enough. But they have lowered the garage, so they do have the opportunity to make sure that the slope of the driveway meets the minimum required slope. So having said that, there's a lot of little things that needs to be revised and be consistent within its own scale and style. So by the end of the day, it's going to change. So the question is, do we see this back, or do we want to send it off?
Mr. Chair, on that note that you just asked, the last item, which is whether we want to return it for redesign or we could actually condition many of the conditions that we've been talking about. I think the latter is the way to go. I think because there's no second story and because we're not really talking about the mass on a second story, it becomes a lot easier for us to prescribe a type of style that we think would be kind of appropriate given what's being proposed, and two, all the other conditions that we've talked about, and then have them work with staff. So that would be my approach. And I guess we could maybe see if everybody else is on the same page. If that's the case, we could spend our time and efforts on conditioning those conditions. And if not, then we'll just kind of move on and spend our time on that motion.
I agree with this approach as well.
The big question is that if we're going to completely redesign the project, I think we owe it to the neighbors and everybody else for them to see the end result rather than be surprised of what they're going to come back with. So I think if it's going to drastically change that much from what they're being proposed, if it's going to be somewhat of a small revision, creating gable end roof at the garage or replacing some of the windows to, and that's what my concern is. So
I guess I'm leaning more towards those kind of prescriptive conditions.
Okay.
But again, it's up to you guys as well, because it seems as though.
Well, let's do this. Why don't we go through the conditions and see where we're going with this, and see how much of a revisions are we going to have, and then we can leave it up to staff if we want to approve that, and if staff realizes that this thing is going to be a different, structure and design that we've seen, then you guys make the decision for.
Then they could ask us to actually go
to bring it back, or and.
Well, once you make the decision to approve with conditions, we can't bring it back to you unless the applicant cannot or refuses to adhere to your conditions.
I think that was the
right.
Thinking was that if they can't adhere to the conditions that are prescribed, then you would bring it back.
Okay.
Staff would determine if it was adhered to effectively.
So, can we go through the conditions?
Sure.
So I heard general agreement with the staff conditions. One thing I'd like to hear more about, because to our mind, the roof design was kind of one of, if not the biggest problem here in terms of the hip that's spanning the entire width of the house, which is really bringing the height up. We were hoping to break that down, possibly introduce a gable at the garage or maybe gables in other locations as part of the reconfiguration. But I think the way that condition is written would address where you've taken this. We hear that you want to change the windows to a higher quality material, whether fiberglass or aluminum-clad wood. We hear that the garage door should be, I believe you've achieved consensus on a single door, or this possibly the staggered of the
Mr.
two
Charchin
doors.
and I think that 2 doors is a better choice, and I think we have a split.
Oh, I thought
on
it was
that.
a 3-1.
So
Okay.
mine was an added condition of actually, rather than having a staggered or one garage door is in forward than the
We've
other.
done that on a lot of projects lately, and it's pretty effective. So.
On that note, the only reason why I was kind of leaning towards having one garage door is because of the awkwardness of the driveway. If you end up with 2 doors, like you guys were saying, basically the right garage door is not going to get used all that often, and you're just not going to be able to access it. Whereas if it's one door, that becomes a little more usable, especially if there's small cars for them to try to get it. So anyways, that was my thinking.
I just had another thought on the garage, and you'll have to tell me if this is in keeping with either the Mediterranean or the Spanish style here. What about just a flat roof with just a strip of tile?
Yeah, so one thought staff has is that because we heard the concern in the community about the camphor tree also adjacent to the apron, we'd be hesitant to see that apron change, but it looks like through changing the configuration of the driveway, we could have the more traditional narrow driveway right at the sidewalk, and then as it comes up the slope toward the house, it'll fan out a little bit earlier than it does in their drawing, which hopefully would solve the problem and still maintain the required landscape at the front.
Okay.
Could work.
So,
Okay, so we'll include a condition about changing the shape of the driveway and include that the camphor, the street tree shall be
remain.
maintained every effort possible to avoid having a problem with that. The front door will be changed to a single door without the ornate ironwork, something more in keeping with either the Spanish or Mediterranean style that this ends up with. The bay windows will be redesigned to be more in keeping, assuming if this goes with a more Spanish style, a square bay with a separate roof might be more appropriate than the kind of curved bays that they're proposing that die at the soffit. Speaking of the soffit, we heard that you'd rather see, regardless of where the roof goes, to have open eaves with rafter tails rather than the boxed eaves that are proposed. Eave detail. General concern regarding the height, which could be partially solved at least through the roof redesign, but also we heard that some of you thought dropping the ceiling height from 10 feet to possibly 9 feet could help with that. We heard consensus, I believe, to use two-piece clay tile rather than the S-tile that was proposed. And the amount of roof issue that was discussed, I think, would be affected by the redesign of the roof, staggering the garage doors like we mentioned, and that's everything that I've got.
And Mr. Charchian mentioned something about the garage roof.
So, would that be in keeping? I mean, there's plenty of Spanish style garages, especially on mountain, that are flat.
Usually the flat garages,
They're
that I've
separate,
seen,
yeah. They're
They're
not
completely
attached.
separate. They're detached. They're in the back. They're not the dominant part of the front entry of the building. So I think they are the garage. There are garage doors. So if the short of us telling them to move the garage to the back, and we're not saying that, we're keeping the garage in the front. So I think we just need to make it part of the design of the building itself and make it work.
Okay, fair enough.
You know what I mean? So I think having the large the gable roof that they're proposing, I think that gives a lot more mass than it needs to be. So I think a gable end or a hip roof with the exposed gable end, I think
that would reduce
ridge.
There's also the problem where that proposed hip roof at the garage hits the higher wall behind it. It leaves kind of some awkward wall area. So we would hope through the roof redesign to kind of make that interface more smooth transition.
So with all those conditions that were presented, is that something, Mr. Platt and staff, you're comfortable at least taking a shot and working with applicant? And if, of course, you're unable to get these resolved, it would come back to us anyways.
Right.
Is that something where you guys are comfortable doing?
If we could get a little more clarification from the board, just, I personally, the difference between Spanish and Mediterranean on some of these new houses is kind of a fine line. And I'm not sure that it matters that much as long as you're comfortable with the design, but if that is an issue for anyone, we should hear more about it.
I think really the biggest issue would be how the window treatments, how the windows are treated. If they're recessed, if they're not, the material around the windows. I think that's really where you don't have a place.
Details and materials that are consistent with the style that's being presented overall. And if
Yeah.
it all kind of jives with the roof and the windows and the entryways. Whether it's a contemporary Mediterranean or a contemporary Spanish, as we all said, it's a fine line anyways.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not. We're not here to dictate style necessarily. We're just
for the style, it's standard staff practice to have recessed windows with sills. On a Spanish, we just have a simple stucco opening. If you wanted a bullnose, we could look for that specifically. And I've just added a condition to make sure that we get a section, a vertical and horizontal section through a typical window opening so we can see its placement in the wall.
But I think, I mean,
we have that already.
I think that's up to applicant to choose a style and holistically, treat the entire project with that style and make the materials match that style. I think that's really what we're saying here is if, and it is a fine line, but it should be a little bit more defined.
Needs to be consistent throughout.
Stucco walls and red tile roof are consistent with both of those styles. And I think if we get the bays in order, change the front door, figure out the massing of the roof, I think it could work for either of those.
So I'll make a motion to approve with conditions.
Okay.
I second that.
Roll call, please.
Motion by Board Member Charchian, and the second by Board Member Benlian to approve with conditions. Board Member Charchian?
Yes.
Board Member Benlian?
Yes.
Board Member Simonian?
Yes.
Chairperson Malikian?
Yes.
Motion carries 4-0. Thank you.
Okay. Now let's go back to Dearmont. And we already had.
Mr. Chair, do we want to
Yes.
give the audience 30 seconds to choose whether they're staying or leaving before we start?
We can. So we're gonna. We're still. Excuse me. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I still don't have an applicant card for Dearmont, and only neighbors. So if we have a card, do we have a card for? I'm sorry, for Dearmont, do we have anyone going to speak? Can we have a card, please? Okay, I need a card. Oh,
fill one out after.
Okay. So
you could fill out the card afterwards, sir. So you could start and then fill it out afterwards. Just put your name, state your name for the record.
Good evening, Design Review Board members and city staff. Horst Knoppenberger, I'm the architect working with George and Maria Najarian on Dearmont. Apologize for being late this evening to you and to the neighbors who have been patiently waiting. Having said that, let me just introduce the project. George and Maria have a growing family of two young children. They recently purchased this house after George grew up in this neighborhood, actually. The existing single-story house is roughly 2,600 square feet. It was built in 1961. It has really not been touched since 1961. While the pattern of development within the neighborhood has evolved into much larger homes. The existing site is 18,000 square feet. We're proposing a house of 4,800 square feet of habitable floor area. When I met with George and Maria, George, having grown up in the neighborhood, it was very important to him that this house, or the design of the house, have a contextual approach. George drove me up and down the hills, and we looked at a wide sort of array of architectural styles, modern houses, Mediterranean houses, all the things you were talking about this evening. We saw kind of a combination, within that context of single-story houses from the street as well as two-story houses. Given the program of a young family, we understood that the best way to integrate interior living with exterior living would be to preserve as much of the site area as possible and try to consolidate the program into the structure. So we started to look at the idea of doing a two-story home. Once we kind of got into that conceptual approach, we began to look at ways to integrate the two-story program into the pattern of development of the neighborhood. So the idea that we came up with is to excavate the lower level of the home approximately 8 feet below grade, so that as you're standing in the street and you're looking at the proposed structure, it sort of visually reads as a single-story structure. We created a procession of courtyards leading to the entry. We pushed the proposed structure further away from the street to create privacy, for the young kids and for George's family and friends. And in doing so, the entry courtyard, which accesses the house, is actually, the street is sloping quite a bit, but the entry courtyard is 8 feet. I think everything that I'm talking about is probably best represented in the street rendering, right behind you. We tried, very sort of cautiously to not impact, things that adjacent neighbors are enjoying in the neighborhood: preservation of views, preservation of privacy, and also kind of a preservation of mass and scale. So we've developed a concept which the top of our proposed roof, the highest portion of the roof, is only 2 foot 6 inches above the ridge of the existing structure, once again built in 1961. So I believe all the board members, I know planning staff has seen the photographs taken from the adjacent houses, and I think that we could all agree that the view impact is minimal and reasonable, given that this site hasn't really changed much since 1961. As far as like a broad stroke planning perspective for the project, it's a mid-century modern house. It is L-shaped on the backside around a central courtyard. How long do I have?
5 minutes.
I better wrap it. better go a little bit faster. It's an L-shaped house. We found that within the City of Glendale's hillside design guidelines, that this was one of the paradigms that was suggested in terms of the way the house actually embraces the site. L-shaped configuration seemed to fit in really well. You can see that what we've done with the project is we're trying to integrate the existing structure into the natural topography by concentrating the larger volumes uphill, and then we transition slowly. The volume in the right is actually a covered outdoor space off the kitchen. So we're slowly transitioning these volumes to sort of have a relationship to the natural topography. We're using, to create further articulation, we're using a palette of stone and stucco and steel to provide further articulation to the building, as is also suggested in the hillside design guidelines. This particular project the garage will not have. Thank you. We also wanted the garage to not have an adverse impact on the front elevation, so the garage is side loaded. The garage is completely subterranean, so it's very discreet and private. Thank you.
Do we have any questions?
Yes, I do.
We have some questions for you.
So when you were running late, the part that you missed was a question I had for staff about the amount of grading on this project.
Yes.
The staff report does not indicate any grading. You're indicating going 8 feet into the ground to excavate a garage. So do you have calculations for the amount of cut and fill?
Yes. Yeah, I did.
Where are they?
Some preliminary calculations this morning myself, and I was. And I just wanted to clarify too. The lower level is excavated 8 feet on average into grade. The garage itself, which is below that lower level, is an additional excavation of about 8 feet. So we're proposing some 16-foot cuts. I came up with roughly 2,750 cubic yards of excavation. And these are, of course, preliminary calculations. I mean, once we figure out the foundations and caissons, once the structural engineer is involved, that calculation may change.
Yeah. So again, I'm going to have to restate what I stated earlier, and I'm glad that you're here, because here's my concern with moving forward at this stage. If you've reviewed the hillside guidelines, you would know that anything above 1,500 cubic feet of earth movement requires special consideration by the Design Review Board in our purview under the hillside guidelines and some other CEQA type stuff that has been put on our plate as of, I think, 2013. So, you're coming in now with this project, and I will say, and this is a little earlier in the process to say this, but it's a good design. But we need to have these calculations in order to understand exactly the impact on the soil, on the hillside, on the amount of earth that's being moved, on the impact to the neighborhood from that earth movement. So I feel very uncomfortable moving forward with this huge, gap in information. I mean, I'm sorry to say that, but it's critical on a hillside development. If you had told me that you were building on grade or a couple of feet, we could figure that calculation out. But you're talking about 16-foot cuts. I was at the site today. I stood there and I looked and how is there no earth movement? Which is what the staff report said, and it turns out that that's an error.
Yeah. So maybe I could, and thank you for those comments. I mean, there are certainly things that we should consider. One thing I would say is we went through a very lengthy process, working very closely with planners here at the city. We had 3 meetings. It was very helpful. They helped us to make informed decisions about the project. I read the Hillside Design Guidelines, and several things are encouraged in the Hillside Design Guidelines, like, for example, side-loaded garages. So it's a bit of a give and take. On one hand, what we're getting in terms of a pedestrian experience is we're not getting a garage on the front elevation. Unfortunately, or maybe paradoxically, on this particular site, to do a side-loaded garage, there's going to be excavation. I also would say, too, that from the very beginning, even before George and Maria bought the property, it's been thoroughly investigated by a local geotechnical firm. And had I known that that was going to be an issue this evening, and I'm not pointing the finger at anybody, I certainly would have brought him with us, because everything that we're proposing from a geotechnical perspective is actually encouraged, because this property has up to 20 feet of fill on the upper part of the property. And from the very beginning, we began to kind of get our arms around the idea of excavation, because the geologist was telling us that, we have to remove that fill anyway. So at that point, why not sink the building into the ground? Why not do the excavation? It made perfect sense.
Okay. I have a question. Do we have
I have a question as well.
Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead, please.
Just for clarity, there's an existing pad that exists.
Yes.
It has a retaining wall at the end. And somewhere in that area, you're going down one level for your living level, and then you're going down another level for your garage level. And so from the edge of your excavation, what is that distance more or less to your retaining wall?
Yeah, that's a good question, and thank you for that. So the diagram, the upper diagram in yellow, that's a section cut from the front of the site to the back of the site, and what we're showing in yellow is existing grade.
I'm sorry, would you mind coming up?
Oh,
Why
no,
don't
that'd
you
be great.
Actually come up and that way. There should be a pointer.
Yeah, this diagram was not submitted. Thank you.
And if you could just speak loudly for the microphones.
Okay.
Thank you.
So this section is cut from Deermont to the back of the property, and you can see in yellow here, this is existing grade, natural grade. So you can see how much of the existing structure is below grade and how much of the existing structure, roughly the equivalent of a single story, comes up above grade. The site is relatively flat as we cut this section, and then it does drop, pretty quickly, out here at the end of the property. Right now, there's an existing swimming pool that's pretty close to the edge of the bluff. So you can see the proportion of excavation. The area where the house is actually going to be below existing grade.
Would you
I hope
outline?
that answered your question. I don't know.
Would you outline the existing
house?
Yes, where is the
Okay.
existing house?
So I do. Okay, I have that here as well. This diagram is cut right through Deermont. And in blue, we're showing the profile of the existing house. And it's only over here where the roof of the master bedroom, we have some clear story windows. It's one of our sustainable features of the project, cross ventilation. This roof is 2 feet 6 inches above the ridge of the existing house built in 1961. And so that's this little, and then also the house built in 1961 stops right here. And then there's kind of a driveway slope up to the house. So the only portion, the only outline of the existing structure which falls outside of the perimeter, of the existing structure is really just this 2 feet 6 inches and a small little section over here.
And I have two follow-up questions. By the way, I very much appreciate, I think we as a group appreciate all the diagrams. It is extremely helpful, so thank you for taking the time.
My pleasure.
To put those together. In the top section, can you also describe more or less the edge of the existing structure if you were going to look at it from the top section?
Yeah.
So you kind of describe where the pool is more or less at the edge of the bluff.
That's a great question, and that's something I didn't bring with me, but
if you had to guess.
Perfect. As an estimation, right along the edge of the bluff, there's the existing pool, and then there's about 12 or 14 feet of patio. Mm-hmm. So I would say that the existing single-family structure, and George may have seen it because you've seen the stakes. Maybe George could speak to that, but I would say the stakes here are probably pretty close to the downward edge of the existing structure.
Yes.
Okay.
It is. And
good guess.
And so the second part of my question is that on the lower level, there seems to be about 2 equal spaces. You have a garage, and then you have another space that's actually probably a little bigger than your garage, that's labeled as mechanical room.
Yes.
And I bet that's probably adding good amount, because it's about 500-600 square feet.
It is.
Towards your grade. What is the purpose of that room?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. So the purpose of that room is we thought it was important to consolidate all of the mechanical equipment. We were designing a house that would be perhaps not LEED certified, but in our office we've designed platinum LEED certified houses. Many people these days, and I'm sure you see it, they don't want to go through the whole LEEDs process, but we do think it's important to design a house of that quality. So we're thinking, photovoltaic panels. We're thinking rain barrels so that we can collect the rainwater from the roof for irrigation purposes. So a lot of that will be sustainable technology, and then all the mechanical equipment. We don't like to hear the AC units on, neither do the neighbors, so all of the AC units will be down there in that location. Those doors will be louvered to provide the combustible air. So it's all, that's a consolidation of all the mechanical space for the house.
And so where that stair comes down,
yes.
Is this all kind of open air in here? That's
it
part
is.
Of this open
it
air?
It is, yes.
And what are these over here?
That's an herb garden. George likes to cook, and I can show you in this elevation, right here, when you, this is the kitchen, there's a covered outdoor space for eating, and then as you walk around that wall, there's an herb garden. We want this house to be sustainable.
And as Mr. Tarchin brought up, the extra caution and that goes into looking at homes that are over 1,500 cubic yards
yes.
of grading. If you had to guess, what is the cubic yardage of that area that we had just referred to?
Yeah. So 3-car garage, that's going to be about 600 square feet. The space above it is 600. That's 1,200 times 8. That's 9,600 divided by 27 is about 300. Does that sound about right? Okay. Yeah, maybe 350 cubic yards.
So of the 2,700, about 300 cubic yards are in that space?
Yes.
Yeah, you have about 1,500 square feet for the garage and the mechanical combined.
Okay. I do have, if you can go over there, I do have a question for you as well. What do you anticipate to be the structure of the roof and the flooring and the structure of the building?
Yeah, we've designed a lot of houses like this up and down the coastline, and we've projects in other places like Dallas and Denver, and pretty much, especially on hillsides, it's going to be steel, caissons for the pool at least. We may have caissons for maybe the downhill portions of the house as well. When you have a lot of glass like this, you invariably have primarily steel construction, and then either wood framing or metal framing. We're looking at maybe doing metal framing.
The reason that I'm asking is that the profile that I see along the street and rest of the building is very thin. It's a 12-inch profile that goes around. But front and back, it's same elevation, same thickness goes front to back. So there's absolutely no drainage or any kind of a slope that it's being thought of. So I'm just wondering, how's that going to be taken care of?
It's a great question. You know, we try to keep these structures as or the vertical package of the roof as thin as possible, because we're trying to create this feeling of like weightlessness and lightness on the hill. So all those inches really matter quite a bit. But we have like the roof package above the master and the lower roof at the upper level to the right of it, that actually is an 18-inch roof package on the outside. So it's 12 inches for structural, and we anticipate 6 inches for a parapet so we can contain the water. And then on the inside...
So I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
So your sections that you're showing 12 inches, they're actually 6 inches higher? Is that what you're saying? So the building height is 6 inches higher?
I believe the entire package is 18 inches, and you're absolutely right. I'm not seeing any curbs on that elevation. That may have just been a drawing mistake, but we prefer curbs over gravel stops. We with a gravel stop, you sort of force the water to come more to the middle of the roof, and we're trying to avoid that. But we do anticipate an 18-inch structural package.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Well, I've made the concern. I've stated my concern that I don't have enough information to move forward without an actual calculation. I hate to do it, but it needs to be in front of us for us to be able to consider this matter. It is significant grading. It's not included, and it's being made as a motion by a council, by a board member, and therefore I would say rescheduling on our own motion.
So
to be fair to the applicant, so the applicant doesn't have to pay any fees.
The continuance doesn't. There are no fees for continuance. But we need more information. You may need more information.
Well, it's fair to the applicant as well, because we would hate for this to be marred in issues down the road because we didn't have that information to consider.
So I understand, and the question that I have is for staff. Under the CEQA status and site slope and grading, it really indicates that there's no non-proposed, and the CEQA is not required. And if, as the applicant stated, if it's 2,700 cubic yards, is that going to trigger a CEQA?
Well, it triggers your environmental review. CEQA is part of our whole process, but it definitely is over the 1,500 cubic yard threshold, and staff apologizes for this error. It's clearly an error, and we agree that a continuation is probably in order based on the fact that we haven't really been able to analyze this ourselves.
Okay. So what do we want to do? Do you want to continue this until this information? Obviously, we need to review and have the proper documents for us.
Is it as simple as him getting the civil engineer to basically give the cut and fill and the overall grading, or are we looking for something more than that?
Well,
I mean, I don't know what the consequence of the additional.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not as familiar with this project as I am with most. But just looking at it, I think we have issues. If we're really dropping down 8 to 16 feet here, I don't understand how that affects some of the other site conditions. The driveway, the architect is saying that the driveway meets our slopes, but it opens a question: just how's that happening? I think we could work with the design team to clarify some of these questions, give you additional diagrams and sections, whatever else we'd need.
And if there's 20 feet of fill, as the applicant indicated, then you might have retaining wall issues.
Right.
Visible from the street.
Well,
Potentially.
yes,
Well-
potentially. But I mean, if we're taking dirt out, it's a good thing, except for all the trucks going back and forth. But it is lightening up the structure and it's nestling it in to the hillside. That said,
So I just want to be on the record for the applicant. Let us just finish because we're deliberating right now. So there are certain projects that we have X amount of grading, certain projects that we have a very minimum amount of grading. In this particular case, it seems like we have over 1,500 cubic yards of grading. In a lot of cases, the grading that it's being proposed, it helps and alleviates a lot of the mass that you see and other conditions that it creates. In this case, creating and removing this much dirt, it actually helps and pushes the building down, and I don't want to say I'm glad to see the pushing of the building and removal of the dirt, but again, it is a number that we have to have the correct numbers in record. So having said that, do we want to...
The only other option, Mr. Chair, and I'd have to ask staff, and maybe we would have to defer, I don't know, but can we hear public comments and then request additional information so that people don't have to come up?
I would say if we're going to continue it, that it's best to just continue it and not put everyone through that. Insofar as, personally, you asked my opinion, Mr. Chair, and I think a civil engineer, for them to do a cut and fill analysis as they would like any other scenario, and to do the color diagrams that's requested, usually that's part of the application, and then maybe have your civil engineer here actually to answer the questions. I do feel bad for the applicant. I got to say, there's a lot of work that's gone into this, and I think if had you known, you probably would have done it. But at the same time, it is a check off in the application standards and the application guidelines. It does say that, and so in any case, here we are. So I think if we have that, we could give you a date certain continuation tonight that's based on your schedule, where we put it on the calendar and you come back on a certain day. We could probably even work with you guys that you're the first one on the agenda. And that's something where...
And it wouldn't have to be renoticed, correct?
It wouldn't, yeah, it would just...
If it's continued to a date certain, no. However, I'm not sure what the information is going to reveal and staff's analysis on that information.
Well, what if we do a date certain, and then as you go through your analysis, if it gets to be more complex or more things come up, then you would tell the applicant, and then you would renotice it. But I think...
And to add to Mr. Simonian's comment, just for, I feel bad for the applicant as well. I'm not doing this because I'm trying to make it more difficult for the applicant, but it could be much more difficult for the applicant if we go through this whole process, approve it, and then somebody decides, wait, that information isn't there, I'm just going to appeal this, and then you're 2 years out from potentially doing anything with this property. So I want to make sure that we have a complete package.
Anyone who's here from the public to speak on this or just interested in it, whether you're for it or against it, there are postcards on the table at the front that you should fill out, definitely fill out, and then we'll be able to get your information in case we're renoticing it, and we'll try to also contact you depending on date certain or not.
Can we pick a date then, maybe in June? I think that would be sufficient time for a soils report.
Well, wait, I don't know if we're asking for a soils report, but
for calculations.
They said they had a geotech report already, and so it would be calculations, diagrams, and whatever else helps explain your site work.
Would you like to step up? We do have a question for you.
Yeah, I mean, that calculation shouldn't take us more than a couple of days, so whatever is,
the next hearing.
The next available, contingent upon George's schedule.
When is our next?
Well, the next one would be in 2 weeks, but I don't believe that would be enough time for you to prepare the documentation. And also, I would prefer that the staff report be amended to reflect.
So how about...
first meeting in June?
First meeting in June.
So,
A month from today?
well,
No.
there's also May 11th and May 25th. So,
No, okay, so a month from today.
so May 11th or May 25th.
Do we know what the...
I stand corrected, a month from today.
In June. Would that be enough time for staff to review?
May 25th would probably be a little bit more comfortable.
Yeah, the 11th would be great for us if that's sufficient for staff to do what they need to do.
Will the 25th will also be?
Yep, yes, yeah.
I would make a motion to continue the matter to May 25th, date certain, and give, notice being given.
May 27th.
It would be May 25th.
25th.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm
I
in
think
the
you're
wrong.
looking at
I'm
wrong
looking-
year.
Right, sorry. So, May 25th.
May 25th, 2017.
And I'll second that motion. And maybe we could work
Mr. Chair,
with
there's a person
Jed to try to get them as the
They,
first one on
they
this.
will be the first. As a continuance,
sorry.
all continued cases are the first.
I'm sorry.
possible for us to make our statements now? We can't.
The problem is that we're not opening the public hearing yet. I mean, we did open, the applicant spoke, but we have to continue because we don't have the information, and you guys don't have the, public does not have the correct information to speak on. And if I let one person speak, then I have to let everyone speak, and that, therefore the continuation is not going to really make any sense for anyone. So, so the question is that, I'm sorry, I can't, I'm sorry, he's the applicant, so I'm going to let the applicant speak. He's the architect of the project. The public is the question that they need to know the correct information that it was not provided. So we want to correct that. We want to have the proper information in hand, and as public, you deserve to know what is the right amount of grading that is being proposed. So May 25th, absolutely. We have your cards. I'm very sorry this was a clerical issue or an error. So we just need to make sure that all the documents is properly presented to the public and to us so we can make the proper. I don't know, and we will have them look at that. So,
Mr. Chairman, we also encourage people. I understand, it's a Thursday before some people have religious obligations for today, this evening, and we're going into Easter and Passover period. It's imperative that you also reach out to us by email. There's several emails from people that couldn't make it that have come in. There's ways to communicate with us. We just want you to have the information available, and we don't have it to move forward tonight.
Okay, so just to repeat that this matter is being continued to May 25th in order to have the applicant bring forth a soils analysis and the amount of grading on the project. Now, there was a motion by Board Member Charchin and a second by Board Member Simonian. So I would ask for a roll call. Board Member Charchin?
Yes.
Board Member Simonian?
Yes.
Board Member Benlian?
Yes.
And Chairman Malikian?
yes.
The motion passes 4-0 for the
So the next case, I will have to recuse myself, and I will step away, but I would like to pass the baton to Mr. Charchin.
Okay.
And we will go on a recess for 5 minutes.
All right. Seeing that...
As soon as...
We're ready? Okay, we're on. So I'm assuming the position as Chair Pro Tem, as the Chairman has recused himself from this matter, and I'm now calling PDR 1526902, 1752 Ard Evan Avenue. If I can go ahead and get the staff report.
Yes, Mr. Chair and Design Review Board members. Can you do the map? This next case is Design Review case number PDR 1526902, and the project address is 1732 Art Even Avenue. This is at the northern end, the terminus of Art Eden Avenue. The property is a large 8.5-acre lot. It's zoned ROS, residential open space, and a single-family dwelling is permitted on the property. Let me give you a little background on this property. A few years ago, there was a proposed subdivision of this lot into two lots and two proposed single-family houses, one on each lot. Each one of the new lots was going to be approximately half of the existing lot, so approximately 4 acres each, give or take. Two single-family houses were proposed. Both of them went to the Design Review Board. One house, approximately 5,700 square feet, with an attached garage, and the other one approximately, again, 6,000 square feet, with an attached 3-car garage. One of the houses got approved by the Design Review Board. This was in 2012. The other one was returned for redesign with conditions. Since then, the applicant withdrew the subdivision application, and a proposal for a single house on the entire lot was submitted, and that application for a single house on the entire lot is the subject of tonight's design review. For the parcel map at the time, a mitigated negative declaration was adopted by the Planning Commission, and it was acknowledged by the Design Review Board for each one of the houses. At that time, the determination was based on the following environmental concerns. There were archaeological artifacts on the property, and the mitigation measures of the mitigated negative declaration related to the treatment and the disposition of the archaeological artifacts. Since the current application, the proposed area of construction is similar to what was initially reviewed and approved, staff's determination was the adopted mitigated negative declaration would apply to the current project with the same mitigation measures relating to the documentation and disposition of archaeological artifacts during construction. Let me go over the current project. The proposal is for a single house, approximately 7,500 square feet, 2 stories, with a proposed cul-de-sac accessing two attached 2-car garages. The amount of grading is proposed to be approximately a little under 2,000 cubic yards. Most of it would be export with a little bit of fill. The site topography is relatively flat towards Art Even, and then the site slopes up to the north, further away from the street. In terms of staff's review and recommendation, staff thinks that the proposed house and site development is consistent with the design review guidelines, with a couple of exceptions, and they've been noted in the staff report. One is the second story the middle portion of the house and on the east side of the house, the second story steps forward compared to the first story, and staff thinks that this goes against the adopted design guidelines and that the second story should be stepped back from the first story and not forward. So staff is recommending approval of the project with a condition to address this, to push the second story back. And the second area where staff thinks that the proposed design doesn't comply or is not consistent with the design guidelines is the flattening of the area behind the house to accommodate decks and a pool. And staff's opinion is that the flattening is not consistent with the topography and the adopted design guidelines, and a condition of approval is recommended to modify the pool and the associated deck areas to be more consistent with the topography.
If I could clarify condition one, there's also a concern in the central portion of the house where there's really not a second floor, but there's a bridge connecting the stairway to the second floor on the right-hand portion of the house. And part of that condition is also looking to see if that bridge could be pushed back toward the rear of the property so that there would be stepping rather than a two-story facade at that kind of entry central location.
Is it possible to point that out, Mr. Platt?
So this section here is really not occupiable space. It's really just corresponding space from the stairway here to serve the bedrooms on the second floor here. Right now, this is more or less a stacked volume, and we thought that this one-story volume could be maintained a little more explicitly if this were pushed back, because if you look at the roof plan somewhere, I saw it on a different drawing, but basically, well, this helps. There's a flat roof area back here over the living room, and the idea was that this bridge could be moved away from the front facade to kind of create a stepping.
Can you explain the second floor that he was talking about?
This is it's a little hard to see, but this area is actually cut into the hillside. The center section is more in the flat portion of the site, and there's an overhang here. And generally, with the hillside guidelines, we look to see that the second floor steps back to follow the slope. So
You're referring to that balcony more like this kind of this thing.
balcony, and then but I think this balcony overhangs. I think this wall and this wall is more or less in plane.
Yeah. If I may add a couple of things to this. We have photos of the site and the story poles, and we have them available here. We can make them available to the board members, and they show the relationship of the story poles in relation to the visible artifacts in the field. And the second thing that I'd like to mention is that staff received a number of emails related to the project in opposition. They came from private citizens, individuals, and from the Historical Society, the Glendale Historical Society. We've made copies of all those emails and made them available to each board member and the applicant.
Yes, it would be nice to see the story pole pictures as they relate to these artifacts. Has staff had a chance, I'm sure, to review these artifacts? What are they? Why are we calling them artifacts? What is it?
They were identified in the environmental discussion at the time of the proposed subdivision a few years ago. They are historical artifacts. They haven't been vetted in terms of their significance, but the mitigation measures require that an archaeologist be available on site to document them and to review their significance during any construction or any demolition.
And just to add on to that, the reason we're treating these as artifacts is because this site once belonged to the Dan Campbell family, who built Art Even, associate of Leslie Brand, so one of the early families in the development of Glendale. And this site was sold off from an intact parcel that had been in the Campbell family up until it was recently sold. The artifacts reflect some of the outbuildings that were associated with Art Even, the house. They include an incinerator that's above ground and is pretty reasonably intact and in decent condition, if not great. There's a low, kind of a stub of the foundation for what they called the milk house, which is very close to the garage that belongs to Art Even. And then there are a couple of movable artifacts that we're not treating as archaeological resources. There's a trough that looks like it was used for watering horses. There's some farm equipment which we don't treat as artifacts. And the only artifact that's going to be affected by the construction is some simple foundation walls that were part of what they're calling a barn foundation that was kind of toward the center of the site, which is underneath the footprint of the house. That was underneath the footprint of the previous proposal called for a much different kind of turnaround. That was going to be, if I'm right, Chris, a city hammer, a city cul-de-sac.
Yeah.
Where the current turnaround is on private property and it just serves the house and the two garages.
Thank you. Because when the case had come in front of us some time ago, I didn't really remember as much focus on the artifacts at that point in time. So that's why I asked. Thank you.
And we think the same mitigation measures should apply because the area of construction and the projects are very similar.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for staff?
No.
Mr. Pelican, are you done with their staff report?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you. Yes,
Okay.
I'm done.
All right, so with that then, and with my question about which artifacts we're talking about having been already answered, we'll go ahead and open the public hearing, and I'll invite Mr. Rodney Kahn as the representative consultant for the project.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Chairman, board members, and city staff. My name is Rodney Kahn. My offices are located on Brand Boulevard here in the city of Glendale. Our site, as mentioned by Chris, is 8.5 acres. That's 372,000 square feet. The average lot size in the area is about 13,400 square feet. So we're about 358,000 square feet, or roughly 28 times larger than the average lot size in the area. We're proposing a house that in total is 7,562 square feet for a floor area ratio of 0.02, or 2%. The average size home in the area has a floor area ratio of 24%. And there's a range of homes from 6% up to 49%, which includes this house, which is located at 879 West Mountain. It's a few lots away from us. It is a 7,386 square foot house on a 15,000 square foot lot. Mr. Bagdikian spoke about the history of the site. There were two houses that were proposed on this site. And as was mentioned, actually there was a lot split that was approved, or I should say a subdivision or a parcel map that was approved for these two houses. The two houses combined was approximately 12,000 square feet. They're about 6,000 square feet apiece. Also, not just the size of the house, but the houses sat further up on the hillside. They were much more visible. There was a substantial amount of grading that was taking place, and there was larger retaining walls for these two houses. That brings us to our project here today. A completely new project, one single-family house that is now lower on the site. It's actually on the flat or flattest part of the site. Far less grading, 8,000 cubic yards less of grading. In fact, the amount of grading that we're doing for this house is far less than that house that you saw right before us. Also, there was another important consideration from going from 2 houses down to 1. There was a large paved cul-de-sac that was being required of us to be installed for the 2 houses. Because we've reduced it now down to 1, we no longer have that large paved cul-de-sac impacting the environment. Our project architect and the property owner have been working with staff, as was mentioned, for many months, refining the design of the project, taking into consideration these archaeological artifacts, also addressing comments and considerations that were heard on the 2 house projects. The placement of the house on the site was very important to us. And it wasn't just important to us, it was also important to the neighbors. I have some photographs that we've taken, and you can see that we're standing on mountain, and I'll hand these over to you. Standing on mountain, looking up at the site, you'll see one small, in terms of the story pole, that's sticking up because of the placement of our property now in terms of the site being on the flat pad area and the large mature trees, which will remain. And you can look at our landscape plan. We will be planting more. Privacy for the neighbors exists, and privacy for ourselves will exist. The architectural style is a modern, contemporary style. It has high-quality materials and finishes. We wanted to stay true to the volumes and the style in general. While we've worked closely with staff, they are recommending approval, we respectfully disagree with the conditions that are being proposed, the 2 conditions. We feel that our contemporary house, because it sits on a flat portion of the site, it would actually jeopardize the integrity of the volumes and of the overall massing of the building if we were to push back the 2nd floor away from the 1st floor. The 2nd condition, the placement of the building I just spoke about, but also the placement of the pool and the associated pool decks is actually the most logical location for the topography, for the drainage patterns, and for the contours of the land. We've sat extensively with Mr. Bogosian, who's our civil engineer, to talk about these drainage patterns, to look at where we should be placing these structures. He is available to speak to that as well. Where we've placed it is exactly the best location on the site for those structures. In conclusion, this house is well designed. It's appropriately placed on the site. We ask that you approve our project here this evening. I'll conclude my remarks. We have other members of our team that could speak as well, or if you have questions of me now.
Is that, Ms. Billy, is that the full 10 minutes?
5 minutes, no, it's only 5.
Thank you, Mr. Khan.
Sure.
Next speaker, Annette Manassian, who I believe is their architect.
I'm only here if you guys have any design questions as far as the materials and stuff, so I can answer them. But
Do we have any
he explained
questions
everything.
or design?
Not right now.
Okay, we'll reserve the remainder of your time for rebuttal. Then our first speaker is George. It looks like Bogosian, but it looks like an R. Is it Bogosian or? Bogosian. Mr. Bogosian, please come on up. And you're the engineer for the project, so I misspoke. We won't reserve the full 5 minutes, whatever Mr. Bogosian doesn't use, we'll reserve.
Mr. Chairman and board members and city staff, my name is George Bogosian. I'm the civil engineer of this project, and I'm here to answer any questions that you may have regarding the location of the building, why it was selected at the location where we have chosen. At the same time, likewise, the swimming pool. Due consideration was given strongly on the pattern of the drainage system and being the most level area we can find, and to be very sensitive about the amount of grading to be done, the retaining walls that it's proposed here. Comparing to a prior project, we have from 2 foot to 4 feet retaining wall in lieu of 10 to 12, 15-foot walls we had before. This is really comparing to that project, which was very extensive. And as Rodney mentioned, the whole project was much higher level. We had to, in fact, create a bridge to run into the other lot. We had split it into 2 lots, and the tentative map was approved, and we went through the design review board. As I said, we had to create a bridge for natural drainage course because we were going up above much higher location for the 2 homes that we had to build. The reason was we had to create that cul-de-sac, which was a public cul-de-sac, 95 foot in diameter. So as you can see now, we have taken care of natural drainage. We are living alone. Everything is draining into the street and then into storm drain system. And it is, as I said, very sensitive to the hillside. And the only 6-foot wall we have created is just for the sake of hillside ordinance, which is depressed, and that's not being viewed at any place. It's the building. First floor is lowered by 6 foot. And other than that, if you have any questions, I'll be very happy to answer you. And I have a map in here showing the drainage, because I didn't see anything on the board. You can see clearly how it's been done. This is the grading plan.
Yeah, it'd be nice to put that up.
Yeah, if we could put that up, that'd be great.
Mr. Chair, the map is available there, but it's under the colored cut and fill map, so it's available.
This one?
Yeah.
Okay, looks like we have it.
Okay, but I have marked also some directions of flow, so it will be easy for you to fast look at it and
complete record.
have a concept.
Mr. Bogosian, are you done with your presentation?
Yes.
Okay, we're gonna see if any have questions. Mr. Simonian, questions?
Thank you, Chair. There were some comments by staff about reworking possibly the backyard and the pool, et cetera. It's great that you're here as a civil engineer and one that's worked on the project, and so we appreciate that. And so, based on that, what are your thoughts as to staff's condition? And number one, and number two is if that is removed, how would it really alter your design and retaining walls, garden walls, all your swales, etc.?
As I mentioned, this is the most sensitive way of treating the hillside, and that's why I have created myself where the paths should go, including where the building is, the safetiness, everything it has been taken into consideration. If you make any other changes, you will be doing more grading, and it's not going to be, you're not going to achieve anything better than this. This is the ultimate, I feel, what we have produced in here.
Thank you.
Good thinking has been put, a lot of thinking, a lot of hours to come up with this concept.
And behind all your garden walls, behind the home, you've that's where you've designed all your swales, and all the drainage from that hillside is kind of being diverted around the walls and around the home. Is that the intent?
That's correct. And as I just gave you that map with a color directions. It shows exactly where the drainage pattern is working.
I have a quick question, if I may.
Sure.
In terms of location of site planning.
Yes.
Is this the most flat portion of the site? Is that
Yes,
why
it is
big?
the most level area that you can find. As I said again, it is a big concern how much you cut, how much you have to export, import. Grading is most important with the drainage that we have to consider, and the walls.
Correct. But was it selected here closer to the neighbors' homes just because you have like easier access, or just for the reason that it was the flattest portion?
The flattest portion.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Mr. Bogosian.
Thank you.
Next speaker is, and I apologize if I mess up people's names. Ina Neal?
Mr. Chairman, board members, staff, my name is Bila Neal. I reside at 877 West Mountain Street, which is the lot basically right on the corner of West Mountain and Matilyaha on the northern side. I want to compliment the architect for his design. His design is quite lovely. As a matter of fact, it reminds me of Falling Rock. But I think that's the main problem, because Falling Rock does not really, it should be within 300 feet of a 110-year-old structure that is clapboard with gables, dormers, and was built in 1903. It is within, in other words, it's totally irrational for that particular style of structure to be that close to a structure that was designed in the last century. This is a 21st century design, and I compliment it. But the problem is it doesn't fit with, one, in a historical building, which is over 100 years old. As a matter of fact, it's even older than the Brand Park Library. The buildings that are around it were built in the 20s and the 30s. My house, which was built in 1930, which has been there, had unchanged. I'm not objecting to the gentleman constructing a building there or building his home. The problem that I see is he has to adapt to the style of the community. The house that's next door to me that was cited by this gentleman was actually the inspiration for the creation of this particular board. That particular house and the house on Vista is the house that established this board because they were so, how shall I say, did not conform to the architectural style of the community. That's why you're here. This particular house does not conform to the architectural style of the community, and as such, I think you should reject it. I thank you all. I hope you give it due consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Louis, is it Bianco? Yeah. Bianco. And someone wrote it for me to clarify, and I still messed it up. I apologize. Come on up.
I live right down the street from that, and I agree.
Sorry, Mr.
Oh, I'm
Bianco. Would you
sorry.
mind stating your name and address for the record, please, into the
Louis?
microphone?
Address is not required, just
Or,
name.
correct.
Biacco, Biacco.
Thank you.
Okay, you want my address
Nope,
too?
that's it. Thank you.
Okay, sorry. Staff, I never appear too much like this, so I'm kind of nervous. From the site poles that they put up, they made the houses right next to them on Ardeven and Mountain dwarfed. I mean, they're huge, way up in the air. They're just like a volcano sticking up. Let's see. They were very high. They took those down, but that's already new. I would like to know how close the house is going to be, if there's going to be any engineering or whatever it takes, to the Blue Line stream down the middle of that, where the two hills come together.
There's no identified or mapped blue line stream on the property.
Thank you for the
It
clarification.
should be. It's federal.
We'll look into that as if that's an issue.
Okay. Grading. How much of the grading and how much damage to the streets around and the noise is how many tons of dirt are they going to have to make flat areas? There's slopes on both sides. Are they going to put fire plugs? They're going to put a turnaround inside that property? And, Magistrate, the bridge that he mentioned, what was that about? Where do you have to have a bridge? Don't look like there's any room for that, but that's enough for objection, because mainly it's the style of the house is beautiful, but it's out of place. It doesn't belong there. Our houses are built in the 30s. This is a modernistic that's probably in the hills of Beverly Hills or somewhere, but it doesn't belong there, even though I think it's beautiful. Thank you,
Mr.
Patty.
Blanco.
Thank you.
Next speaker, David Miller.
Good evening. David Miller again. I'm obviously here to oppose the project. It is a nice design. I'm not afraid of the modern architecture. However, its mass and scale is it's an absolute monster in this neighborhood. There's one house in the entire area that they have proposed to makes it acceptable for this kind of square footage, and that's the house that was built in the 1980s. As was said, is what prompted this board to be developed. It's almost over 40% on the FAR. It would never be approved today. That's the only house in the entire area. This house is going to be 265% larger than the average residence in the area, which is on average 2,800 square feet. And so massing and size is one issue for the neighborhood. The other issue I have is it's sitting literally on the back steps of the Art Even House, which is not only on the Glendale Register, it's also on the National Register of Historic Places. A couple things from the National Register of Historic Places about this house. The Art Even House is one of the few and earliest remaining examples of county estate homes once common in the base of the Verdugo Mountains in what was otherwise rural section of northwest Glendale. Art Even, which is in Gaelic, means beautiful heights, overlooks and is considered the keystone residence building of the Cumberland Heights Historic District, which was subdivided in 1923. The property directly behind the house and rear section of the carriageway was originally used for auxiliary functions to sustain various domestic farming business activities. And although located in a city at the time with 100,000 residents, it reads as rural. And aside from the decay of former auxiliary buildings, this parcel of nature-acclimated land is relatively unchanged from 100 years ago. That's partly why the Art Even House is on the National Register of Historic Places. And this giant modern box is going to be sitting in its backyard. It's not cohesive to the neighborhood. It's not cohesive to a historic property that's on our register and on the register of the United States. And we're not opposed to, people aren't, I don't think are opposed to some development, but it needs to be appropriate in scale and appropriate in style. Thank you. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Philip Keller.
Hello and good evening. My name is Philip Keller. I represent the Northwest Glendale Homeowners Association. I want to speak about our concerns on Art Even project here at 1732. Firstly, I would like to say that I feel that this is a good piece of modernist architecture in itself. Good articulation, material usage, strong positive negative space delineation, and landscaping. However, that's where it ends. Northwest Glendale Homeowners Association must strongly oppose this proposed project based on its intended scale alone, which we feel is blatantly out of scale for and has no compatibility with the surrounding residential neighborhood. Over 7,500 square feet would dwarf all adjacent homes, and if you factor in the massing of the two garages, it's well over 8,000 square feet. That is massive. Now, some might say, hey, what about that 7,300 square foot house down the road on Mountain, 879 Mountain? Well, that's the poster child for all that could go wrong in residential compatibility and would never be approved, as people said, near 50% FAR. To use that as a realistic or responsible comparable, that's ridiculous. Some might say, hey, it's a 370,000 foot parcel. They could build a 111,000 foot house using city FAR. That would still be within the 30% FAR. So a 7,500 square foot house should be small on the parcel. What's the big deal? The big deal is neighborhood compatibility. You're siting that house up close next to the other houses. 7,500 square feet is literally twice the size of the next largest real house, which is Ardivan, which is about 3,800 square feet. That's double the biggest house. Nowhere else in Glendale on a residential street where the biggest house out of all the averages would then be allowed to have a house double that size built next to it. It would never happen. So why should you allow this project out of scale to be built in this location? You shouldn't allow it. We urge the DRB to return the project for redesign, one that reduces its proposed scale. Maybe you take 50% more than the Ardivan house and add it on, gives you around 5,500 feet, still be a massive house, but much smaller. Give the homeowner everything they need. The talented architect can do that without destroying the designing integrity. It's a modernist house. You can play around with the box massing and still get the same look, set it back a little bit further. I also want to make a comment on one other thing. In the staff report, page 4, under the heading of Determination of Compatibility, Mass and Scale heading, there is no discussion at all of scale in there. If you go through and read it, it's only talking about the mass into itself as a piece of design, not the scale of it to the neighborhood. That is a fault. And they're saying that that's not a problem. That's a fault in the staff report. We support the right of the applicant to build their dream home. I think all the residents want them to have their house. But there's a right that comes with it, a responsibility with that right to do so with a design that is compatible with the surrounding properties. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, sir. Judy Rowe. Ms. Rose handing me a picture of 851 West Mountain Street, which is the Ardivan home.
Yes, I just handed you a picture of Ardivan. That's my home. Good evening, everyone. My name is Judy Rao. My family and I live in the historic Ardivan home, 851 West Mountain Street, and we have responsibility for maintaining the historical significance of the site. Our concern with this project is that the MND is no longer relevant because environmental issues under CEQA may have changed. The original project that was approved in 2010 was to subdivide the parcel, as you heard, into 2 lots and construct 2 smaller dwellings. These 2 lots were placed further back on the lot and were not as close to our property line and less visual impact. That project was withdrawn. The new project is for the construction of a 2-story, 7,562 square foot home with 2 attached 2-car garages. This project may include potentially significant impacts that were not reviewed in the original MND or the addendum in the following 5 areas. Scale and proportion. The proposed dwelling is more than 2.5 times larger than the surrounding structures and completely out of scale for the neighborhood. Site slope and grading. The project will result in significant alteration of the landform due to the limited, flat, buildable land on the parcel. If size were scaled back, the amount of grading could be reduced. Biological resources. A report prepared by Recon Environmental confirmed the existence of check dams in the canyon bottom and a sensitive wildlife species on site. A federally listed threatened species is known to occur in the area and may occur on the site. The National Park Service has documentation indicating this site is within the movement corridor for P41, the first mountain lion tract in the Verdugo Mountains. Hydrology. The project now proposes grading in a natural channel. Cultural resources. Due to proximity of the construction to Ardivan's property line, verification that this new construction would not cause a substantial adverse change in the significance of a historical resource is recommended. Quotes, new work shall protect the integrity of the property and its environment, unquotes, according to the Secretary of the Interior's Standards for Rehabilitation, Number 9 guidelines. A photographic record must be prepared to chronicle historical artifacts, mentioned before in this meeting, before any of the archaeological artifacts are disturbed on the building site. We request that a copy of this be provided to the Brand Library branch. In summary, the proposed project may produce significant environmental effects that were not discussed in the previous mitigated negative declaration, and a new negative declaration should be prepared. I have submitted a detailed letter to the project's case planner for your consideration and review. Thank you so much for your time and the opportunity to address this committee.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I have a question for staff on that note.
Sure, we're going to allow that question. Go ahead.
Mr. Kraus, there were some comments made about the MND, and I have a feeling there might be other comments as well on that subject as far as if the MND is still relevant and if the MND has been vetted by the planning staff and really what staff's approach is. And I think it'd be important for us to kind of get that approach, get your input at this point in time.
The environmental that was prepared for was done, I believe, in 2010. CEQA requires you to relook at environmental impacts and recirculate if there's new impacts that weren't previously disclosed or if there's new significant impacts that couldn't have been known at the time. Staff did review the neg deck that was prepared for the project and also looked at each of the different resource areas, which is what the addendum was to address, and found that there was no new impacts that weren't previously disclosed in the previous document, which was the reason why we decided that we didn't need to recirculate the environmental documents.
Okay.
So there's less grading that would have occurred because of the two different houses. It is in a different location than the other two houses, but we didn't see that as raising any new significant impacts that weren't previously disclosed.
Thank you.
Any other questions from staff? Okay. Next speaker is Robert Heimers.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, board, staff. Appreciate all your work. My name is Robert Heimers. I own 839 West Mountain, which is property adjacent just to the south, and obviously I would probably be the most greatly impacted by this proposed project since I live right against it, and it takes up most of my backyard. I feel very passionate about this proposed project by virtue of its historical significance and the fact that the very founders of our community were here, and I feel that you as a board should do your best to make sure that you get this project right just because of its cultural significance, how important it is to the community. I think that's evidenced by the turnout here at this late hour. I'm the managing partner of a CPA firm. Obviously, this is one of the busiest weeks of the year, but I feel very passionate about this, and I want to be here to show my support. I'm personally communicating with some land use attorneys, including my wife's cousin who's running for Congress in the 34th District, who is a former LA City Planning Commissioner, Robert Leon, and he's going to be advising on this. So I would advise everyone in the room to really pay attention to detail, look at this project. There may be some potential litigation at the federal level.
Okay. I'm just going to interrupt you. I don't take kindly to where you're going. So
it's not a threat to you. It's factual.
Please focus your comments as to the design issues and not to potential federal or litigation issues. Those can be handled outside the purview of this. We come here to volunteer our time to give our best at reviewing the details that are before us. And
Understood.
Federal issues and lawsuits
Understood.
and these things are not
Understood. And I'm sorry. So let me go back. I believe that the size, I believe that design is very inconsistent with the neighborhood. I think it will greatly impair the aesthetic value of the neighborhood. And there are some concerns. My father was born in Glendale 80 years ago, and he said that my corner, he can personally attest, has not changed one iota in 7 decades. And so this is very significant. On a standalone basis, it's a great project, as has been said before. But when you look at it in totality, it really is garish and really stands out and would be a detriment to the community. So I appreciate your volunteering your time and your efforts, and hopefully we can resolve this. I would hope that you would send it back for redesign with some conditions on the size. Okay, thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Molly King.
Hi, my name is Molly King. Thank you for being here tonight to listen to our concerns. I live at 867 West Mountain, and one thing, my husband and I bought our house in June, and one thing that was truly important to us when we bought our house was this little map that our realtor showed us of the historic district of the Art Even Highlands. And we moved to Glendale from a pocket of Los Angeles bordering West Hollywood, where I'm not sure if you're familiar with what's going on there, but the modern construction has created quite an uproar. There are signs everywhere you look for no more McMansions. And so that's like precisely the type of construction we wanted to move away from. And while I appreciate the design of this house, as many have said, I just don't think it fits in this historic pocket of Northwest Glendale. And, you know, I think there is a moral obligation here. I'm grateful, very grateful that I live in a neighborhood that has a design review board. And I want to compare you to Northwest Glendale, to Houseman of Paris. Can this house be built? Yes. Can it be built to code? Yes. Is the ratio super small for its huge lot size? Yes. But should it be built? No. Does it look like it belongs in the neighborhood? No. And, you know, we just bought this house. It's the house we want to raise our family, where we're going to have a baby very soon. And I'm shocked it's made it this far in its approval, but I really ask you to reconsider it. And if you haven't been in our neighborhood recently, please drive around, look at the other homes, see what's there, and just honestly ask yourselves if this house belongs. Okay, thanks.
Thank you so much. Zuzka Egena?
My email didn't go through. So I was like, okay, thank you. Good evening again. I agree with the others that it's a beautiful house. I personally love modern architecture, but it doesn't belong there. And yes, the property is really huge, but it appears that most of it is hillside. Actual flat, buildable space doesn't seem to be very large. I'm opposed to giving the permit as requested for several reasons. It's adjacent to the historic district, and again, the design does not respect the neighborhood and its residents. Again, the massive scale. The 7,562 square feet is almost 3 times the size of the neighboring structures, which have an average of 2,800 feet. But if you exclude that massive house on Mountain and Vernon, the size ratio disparity would be even bigger. But most importantly, the property is in a wild, undeveloped area, which is unsuitable for such a massive project, in my opinion. Only a small portion seems to be suitable for building, thus would require the grading of the hillside that's been discussed, redistribution of soil. The environmental impact cannot be underestimated. Glendale residents have made it clear that they do not want massive projects in Glendale, and this certainly qualifies as a massive project. It conforms neither to the neighborhood nor to the landscape. New structures should be respectful of the environment and of the community, and sensitive to the city's residents and neighbors. Please do not allow another hotel-sized monstrosity like the one on the corner of Mountain and Vernon to be built. Do not allow topography of the property to be destroyed. Issue a permit for something smaller, more in character with the neighborhood, and more compatible with the environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Susan Dasso?
My name is Susan Dasso, and I live at 923 Cumberland Road in the North Cumberland Heights Historic District. So it's my understanding that the Design Review Board is here to listen and consider the feelings of the residents of Glendale about building in Glendale. To that end, I strongly urge you to deny the approval of the Art Even project for the following reasons. The project is not compatible with the rest of the homes in our neighborhood. The project is not compatible with the lot and the surrounding wilderness. The project will directly negatively impact the kingpin of the Art Even Historic District, the Campbell House, because the project sits in its backyard. And literally, it's awful. So in essence, the style and size of the project is not compatible with the style and sizes of the homes in our neighborhood. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak who has not filled out a speaker's card or who has not spoken? With that, I will allow a rebuttal from the applicant.
Thank you. Once again, Rodney Kahn for the record, Chairman and board members. The presentation I started off with was talking about the size of the site. And over the course of time, there's been a number of different proposals for the site. Some included multiple lots, not 2 lots, not 3 lots, not even 4 lots. So in terms of what we are proposing, one single house, this is the most sensitive in terms of being able to develop this site, this large 8.5-acre site, with just one house. There was a mention about the CEQA analysis, and I thought Mr. Kraus addressed that, but I want to reinforce that there are mitigation monitoring and reporting program that was adopted, and those mitigation measures are still in effect. One of those measures was talking about the archaeological observation, any of the documentation, etc. All of that will still be followed. The large house that I referenced that is a few lots away from us, I could assure you certainly was not our inspiration. It was not something that we look at and we say that is something we would want to replicate or duplicate. In fact, we went in a direction that we felt was something that we would honor the character of this historic district area. We are not part of that historic district, but we are directly adjacent to it. So we thought instead of trying to replicate something, we would highlight and celebrate something different. You've already commented on in terms of the litigation threats. We won't comment on that either. Just to conclude, though, we do feel that we are sensitive. We have been sensitive. We have addressed grading issues. We have addressed other types of issues. And to conclude, the visibility of our site. We keep talking about this house not being compatible. This house should be celebrated. And it's something that is slightly visible. It is not even visible to the area. It's a small visibility. Please take that into consideration. The house alone stands as an asset to our community. Thank you.
Mr. Khan?
I have a quick question for you.
Sure.
Can you comment on the proximity of this property to the Ardivan property they're talking about? Comment about the proximity in terms of distance.
I would have to reference and go up to in terms of a dimension. Do we have a? If we can have our architect do real quick.
Just an approximation.
What would you guess the approximate?
I would be able to tell maybe looking at the...
If it helps, I did a quick scaling from the leading point of Ardivan to the 2-story portion of the house, thinking that was the comparable kind of massing location. And at the closest distance, it was about 150 feet. But the house, the garage and the lower portion is definitely coming closer to Ardivan. So.
Okay.
So about 150 feet then?
To the 2-story portion. And then to be fair to everyone, it is closer to the house, the non-historic, but the house across Ardivan, that I think one of the speakers is a resident in that house, and it was about 60 feet from, and that was again to the 2-story portion, but most of that section is 2 stories.
I asked that question because it was conveyed like it's in the backyard. And
it's visible, definitely.
Okay,
thank you.
I think that's fine. Thank you.
Definitely more than 50 feet because the building to the property line is at 34 feet. So, and then you give and take the street and then the building. So it's definitely more than 50 feet.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Mr. Bogosian to come up because I have a question about his flow chart, and I want to ask also about this Blue Stream issue.
For the record, George Bogosian, the civil engineer of the project.
Mr. Bogosian, you have given us a hand-altered printout of this looks like the preliminary grading plan where you've driven some arrows. And so these arrows represent water flow, is that correct?
That's correct.
And do you, my question is, do you have this retaining wall angled in the back in this fashion to accommodate some sort of
Exactly,
drainage?
exactly. Okay. To accommodate the natural drainage course.
All right, and then the second question I have for you is...
And just for the record, on the parcel map that we had it approved previously for two single families, we had the two homes up above. That's why, for the natural drainage course not to interfere with it, we had created a bridge for that one. As I said, this is so sensitive in every way. It has utilized the level property right in the front where it doesn't, it's no longer we have the problems of high retaining wall and fill and cut quantities.
Last question. In your research on this lot, have you seen any information on the blue line stream?
No, sir.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing. Does staff have a couple of questions for staff before we deliberate, I think. Do we have any information on any federal blue line streams? I mean, they're available on mapping.
I haven't seen any on our maps or referenced in the former environmental documentation.
Okay.
Should have been part of the discussion.
Okay. So we'll leave that issue for now, and we'll visit it in our deliberations, I think.
I have another question for staff. And so, does the historic district overlap into this vacant parcel or not?
It abuts the parcel.
It abuts the parcel, but the vacant parcel is not part of the historic district.
No.
And the way the historic district rules.
Okay, I'm going to ask, it's going to be a very long night if we have comments coming from the back. We need to focus on the task at hand, which is a question to staff from the chairperson. The public comment portion is closed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I asked this because I really don't know the answer to it. What sort of rules, bylaws, guidance, if anything, was inserted into the historic district?
Mr. Simonian, I'm sorry. I think Mr. Bellion may have had a quick bathroom break emergency, it seems like. So I'm going to take a 2-minute break so that he's part of the deliberations.
Oh, okay.
Of anything that's being made. I
thought he got a
apologize,
phone
everyone.
call or
I think everybody could use a 2-minute break maybe at this point for the bathroom, so we'll do that. Please come back. Okay, let's go back on session. We were in the middle of a question from Mr. Simonian to staff. Mr. Bellion had to take a break, and so we went to recess. So we can get a response for his question.
Could we repeat the question?
Please, Mr. Simonian.
Were there any rules, procedures, recommendations, or whatnot that were maybe inserted into the historic district that gave guidance or whatnot on adjacent parcels that are not part of the district, especially vacant parcels?
In general, vacant parcels aren't brought, well, I shouldn't say in general. There are different ways to define boundaries for historic districts. Sometimes you would want to include vacant parcels, particularly if it was within the grid or the subdivided lots that you see, where that would give control over the development to the Historic Preservation Commission, and the community would respond or come to those meetings. In the case of this area in 2004, there was a survey for a large 500-plus home district called Cumberland Heights that was proposed as Glendale's first historic district for a variety of procedural and community-based reasons. That didn't happen, which led to a complete reconfiguration of the historic district ordinance, and we created the design guidelines. We developed a community task force that kind of bought into this. The boundary for that Cumberland Heights district is still an identified historic district boundary, and Ardeven Highlands, as well as its adjoining historic district, which is called North Cumberland Heights, are subsets of the original Cumberland Heights district that was identified. So you can see for the Ardeven portion, the top portion of the map that shows 851, 851 is the house Ardeven. I don't never know how to pronounce it, so I apologize. And in general, with districts, you try to run boundaries along rear property lines when you can, and I believe that was the case when they developed this. The owner of Ardeven at the time in 2004, and when this district was designated, which was, I believe, in 2009, owned those vacant parcels. So they were part of
vacant parcels.
Yeah, so they were still part of the Campbell family, actually.
Parcel or parcels?
I don't know. Parcel or parcels?
We're talking about a singular parcel.
We're talking about the large 300 and whatever square foot lot.
Okay,
was owned by the owner of Ardeven. It was subsequently sold. So at the time when I imagine they drew the boundaries in 2004, it was considered vacant land. It wasn't part of the historic district. And then in the subset district, we maintained those boundaries, and that's why it is the way it is today. But there's no provision in the historic district ordinance for the treatment of properties just outside of the district. It really establishes design review authority, either HPC or DRB.
Thank you. Thank you. That was very helpful.
Yeah. Especially since I happen to live in a different historic district, and my neighbor is outside of the boundary. So.
Right.
I was saying I happen to live in a historic district, and my neighbor is outside the district. So
and you'll have to recuse yourself.
Personally,
if something
it's personally interesting to me as well, but not in this historic district. For the record, I live in a historic district. Okay. Are there any other questions for staff before we start?
No.
Mr. Billington, do you want to start us off
Sure.
on our deliberations?
So when I first got the package from staff, I normally like to look at the plans and review the plans, then read the staff report. This way the staff report doesn't influence what I think about the project. And so I went through the plans, beautiful design, very nice, massive scale is nice, proportion, layout, everything works well. And then I go to the staff report, and I was surprised when I saw the 7,000 square feet, because it didn't look like a 7,000 square feet house, which is a good thing. And I want to emphasize this point because here at this board, every time we give somebody a comment about mass and scale, we tell them it's not the square footage. It's mostly how you break up the mass, how you treat the mass, the way you situate the building, where do you put it in relationship to the neighbors, where do you put it, if it's a hillside property, how do you cover how do you treat the mass, how do you follow the topography of the site. That's what matters. It's not the 7,000 square feet or 6,000 square feet. We've denied many houses that are 2,500 square feet just because they look massive and they're just not designed right. And in this case, I'll be honest with you guys, this does not look like a 7,000 square foot house, and it doesn't bother me because the site is, number one, the site is huge. Number two, I'd rather have one house that's going to affect the neighborhood a little bit rather than the owner coming back and subdividing this parcel into 8 parcels, and now we have 10 times the amount of grading, and now you have 10 modern homes that will affect this historic neighborhood. That's not this parcel, the adjacent historic neighborhood. So in my opinion, I mean, you oppose this, they subdivide it, and you increase the grading, and you have more properties close to your property. I mean, this is a good deal for the neighbors because you're just going to deal with one property rather than dealing with multiple properties. That's just my humble opinion.
Please.
So that's so now let's talk about the design. So in terms of design, I think the materials, they're well selected. It's high-end materials. The design is contemporary. The details and the materials, they're consistent throughout the design. I appreciate the civil engineer being here and answering all these questions on how this is going to affect the drainage, because that's an important part that we look at as well. Now, parts of the, I don't agree. I'm not going to say I don't agree. I kind of disagree with the staff report about the second floor. It doesn't bother me as well. But I kind of think that the footprint of the decks and the area is a little bit too much, and it can be like reduced a little bit just to reduce that grading and get it to maybe the 1,500 cubic yards. In terms of, I spoke about style in terms of situating the house. I looked at the story poles, and I think the situation where the location they selected, it's probably the best location, and that's due to visibility. It's at the lower end. I understand some neighbors, maybe they want the house to be pushed away from them, and that's a legit concern. But once you do that, then you have a more visible house because now it's sitting up higher, and now you're going to do more grading, and you're going to be dealing with other issues as well. So a couple of neighbors mentioned the fact that it's in the backyard, and we verified that it's not really in the backyard. If it's like you're talking about 150 feet from one portion or 100 feet, that's not considered in the backyard. These are my comments, and I would like to hear what my colleagues have to say, and then we can discuss it further.
Mr. Simonian?
I appreciate everyone being here a day before the Holy Week and whatnot and the holiday, and I know it's a late night, so we appreciate it. This project, I remember vividly years ago when it came in front of us as proposed subdivision, and the parcel map was approved at the time, and 2 homes were being presented. And one was more or less in the general location of this house, and then another one was on the right side where it was backing up to all the homes that are I don't know, it's hard to tell, it's just at the corner here. It was the second home was in this area. And so all these existing homes had backyards that were looking up. And you can kind of see what I'm trying to depict in site plan. The second home was more or less in this area from what I recall. It was some years ago, but more or less I remember. And at the time, this board, and it consisted of different members, but I believe I was on the board. There weren't any major design issues with the house that's more or less placed in the current location that's being proposed at the moment, but the major design issues were on the second home because of the fact that it was literally in the backyard of those 5 or 6 homes. So you had multiple garden walls, and then you had this larger home, and it was really affecting the privacy of those existing homes. And so at the time, the one house was approved, the left house, and then the right house, if memory serves me right, I'm looking to staff just.
Yes, the left house was approved. Left house was up the hill.
Up the hill.
Pushed into the hill.
That's right.
The right house wasn't quite in the location. It may have been more in the location of the two-story wing to the right.
It was more like here, I think.
Yeah, it was kind of in the hillside also.
Right. And so the design review board had a lot of issues on the home that was placed on the right side, and we returned it for redesign, and nothing happened. And so then the project went away, and now we have one home. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because there was a lot of history to this, so 10 years worth of cases and hearings and whatnot. And there are some advantages for us board members that have sat through these hearings, is because you start to remember the issues and what was said and how did new applicants deal with difficult scenarios, and whether a new scenario has improved or has actually gone the other way. And so those are all important things for us to consider. At the time, because it was legally, it was approved as a parcel map, and so it was split into two lots, subject to recordation of a final map, which had some conditions and whatnot with the cul-de-sac and whatnot. But in essence, the two lots were proposed. And now we have one home, and so my mindset is that we have one home, and instead of this one home being pushed up into the hillside, it's actually moved down into the flat portion. And this one home is a lot smaller than the combined square footages of the two homes. Now, in essence, when we're talking about overall impact and what is the right approach for a large parcel, well, I think if you had a wish, you would say, well, all large parcels would get one home and that's it. And because usually what happens is we're faced with one large parcel being proposed to be subdivided with several homes, etc. And then everybody comes out and says, no, there should be one home. And then here we have a situation where we have one home, and there seems to be general consensus about it's a nice design, it just doesn't belong here because of the historic fabric. And oh, by the way, if it wasn't 7,500 square feet and it was 5,500 square feet, then it might just possibly maybe fit in. Well, my humble opinion is that when I looked at the drawings and I reviewed the design, I had a very similar reaction as my colleague, in that it didn't seem like a 7,000 square foot home. I didn't see it right away. In fact, well, I'm not going to compare it to the case that we did hear earlier, but in any case, it did not feel like a 7,000 square foot home. The design was well thought out. The massing was done in such a way where it was stepping back from the adjacent neighbors, and we have a 50-foot, more or less 50 feet to the closest neighbor, and then we have about 150 feet to the second story. So is that laid out well site plan wise? I would say yes. Is the grading in the rear appropriate? Well, I'm looking at the overall retaining walls, and they follow the contours of the property. They seem to be all less than 10 feet in general. Some are 2 or 3 feet. And the water is being diverted around the property, so it is nestled into the hillside. And it is conforming to the hillside. Now, insofar as its relation to the historic district, and this is, I think, a very subjective, very, very subjective point I'm about to make, but it is something that I do believe in as an architect, as a modernist, in that we are dealing with a vacant lot that doesn't sit within the historic district. And how interesting is it to have a modern home next to a very, very important historic home? Now, as an architect, I think that is a very interesting concept. And I could also see it very, very clearly that the historic preservationists and people that might live right next door that absolutely love their historic home might see it another way. And so that's why I started out by saying it's a very subjective comment I'm about to make. But as was said, we're volunteers, and our volunteers are our opinions, but we try to stick with the guidelines and the design guidelines, and that's why I was asking all those questions. Are there specific recommendations and whatnot to these vacant parcels that sit outside the historic district? And the answer is no. Okay, so if the answer is no, then I can't let that historic district really cloud my judgment. Then I got to look at the design as presented. And as presented, I'm not seeing mass, I'm not seeing bulk, but I'm seeing a nicely designed home. And so I do support the project. I think with everything that we've seen in the last 10 years or so, and there's been a lot of back and forth on this project, a lot on this parcel. It's taken up a lot of effort from staff. It's taken a lot of effort from the different boards over the different years. This is really one of the reasonable compromises that I could think of. Now, the thing about a compromise is both sides walk away unhappy. When there were two landowners and one of them didn't get to build his home, but one of them did, the gentleman that's sitting here, the other person was unhappy. And in this scenario, there's a compromise too with the existing neighbors and whatnot. So I do believe it's a good compromise. I do believe that it is nestled behind the existing landscaping, and it's in a location that's not visible from the historic district. And those are my thoughts at the moment.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to agree in part and disagree in part, like I always do, I think. You have some good points, and I think none of the neighbors came up and said it was an ugly home, that it was a badly designed home. And I do agree. So I'll be speaking over the humming sound you're hearing in the background, hopefully.
Maybe it was meant for you to reconsider what you were about to say.
No.
No, okay.
I don't think so. I think that you used a label, historic preservationist, and I would consider myself one. If this home was built, if this project was going to be a tear down of any kind in this neighborhood of a historically significant home, and this modern style was going to be the replacement, I would oppose it. Here, that's not the case. I also make it a habit to go out to each property. I was there this morning. I walked by the camper that's there blocking the road. I even noticed the sensors that were on a tree, kind of eerie a little bit there. So whoever put those sensors up probably did it to make sure that they can see, have a safe area. I'm also very familiar with this house. When this house was on the market, God, I think it was 10 years ago, maybe 8 years ago, originally. I went and toured it. It was a fantastic home. And I mean this house, I mean the Arvin home. And we have a little brochure that was provided by one of the speakers. It's a fantastic home. And my fear really was that what I had seen on the plans is going to be stuck right over it, hanging over it, visible from it. But really, when I walked up the driveway, because there was no way to actually drive, I walked it up there. But where's the house? And I literally looked for the story poles. And to my right, I saw a couple of story poles. And I said, is that it? Can't be it. That's like a 1,200 square foot home, right? Or 1,200 square foot imprint. But that was what I saw. But you basically have to walk up, go to the right, and then you see the rest of the house. When you look at the home from Art Evan, when you look at the proposed project from Art Evan, or you look at it from Mountain, you really don't see very much. Now, there is a homeowner here that is very impacted. The gentleman who is a CPA, and I forget your name, I apologize, Mr. Robert Heimers. Mr. Heimers is probably the most affected because he is the closest. His garage, luckily, abuts that backside, so there's a little bit of a buffer from where his living space would be from the home. So, 50 feet plus a garage. We've approved things that have been much closer, and most setbacks in Glendale are unfortunately 6 feet for various lot sizes. So having that kind of a setback is nice. I struggle too because one of the things that makes this neighborhood special, and just the Cumberland Highlands special, is the vast number of historic homes. But I know I was in. One of the speakers spoke about LA. I drove Mount Olympus Drive today. If you know where Mount Olympus Drive is today, you know that is one of the most overdeveloped hillside properties in Los Angeles. And I looked at, as I was driving, I was not looking at homes, but I was just trying to beat traffic to get here. And I saw multiple examples of projects that would never, ever make it in Glendale because the citizens of Glendale were forward-looking and said, we need limitations on these types of projects. So then I come to this project here, and I look at the design, and I appreciate the fact that it's separated out into two wings. I think that does a lot for the mass of it. It also does a lot for the scale of it. I have issues with the amount of grading, and I think that where I would be leaning is a suggestion to reduce that by maybe 10, 15%, which I think will greatly reduce the amount of cut. Maybe not the 1,500 square feet, but I think you can get to 1,800 square feet of cut, cubic yards of cut without too much impact on that backyard. I think you can do that. The reason I asked the water flow question is there might be an engineering issue and there might be a limitation there, but I think that's really where the improvement comes on this project is reducing that cut just a little bit. Now, the biggest question then becomes, okay, so the design of the house is good. I don't think anyone has said it's not. And this is kind of where this discussion, I divert from you, my colleagues here. You have to take the context of the neighborhood into question. Just because there's a line from a historic district doesn't change the fact that you're adjoining, okay? If this house was more visible, if it was up the hill, if it was right behind Art Evan, I would have a lot of issues. But it really isn't right behind the home. I respectfully disagree with those that said it's directly behind. It's directly behind Mr. Hyman's home, right? But from where his home is, it's really not all that visible. And its impact is not that clear. From your back porch, which is an add-on, not historic, just to point that out, but it's an add-on, you do see a portion of the home, right past the swing set that's there. But this lot is going to get developed. If it doesn't get developed with this project, I guarantee you 10, 15, 20 years later, this lot will get developed, and there might be half a dozen homes on that hill, or worse. If you look at the track map, if you look at, what is that, Robin Glen? Robin Glen has the equivalent of, looks like 12 homes, 12 lots, or maybe 14 in that same amount of space. So, development's coming, and we're seeing more and more lots that are becoming economically feasible to develop. And it might not happen, in the immediate future, but eventually, if this lot is not developed with a single-family residence, there's going to be a lot of pressure to develop. The state's already mandating things on us at a local level where they're taking away our ability to limit development, right? A lot of people are angry about the housing that's in the downtown area. A lot of that's development we couldn't do anything about because it's state mandated. And now the state's coming in and stating that we have these granny flats that I know the Historical Society is very concerned about. These are things that are going to be state mandated issues, and so I agree with my colleagues on this issue from a different perspective. I think having a homeowner that is looking at this as a piece of property in their backyard versus an economic, tool for development is a much better compromise than having it done. So then we come to is the design acceptable? It's difficult. The design is a nice design. It is kind of creating a flat pad. I have issue, but I think I'm in the minority, so I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Do you want to go
For
over
now.
or how would you like to proceed? Do you want to go over the conditions?
The only condition that I thought that we had consensus on is a slight reduction of the backyard areas to reduce grading a little bit. Is that the only condition that we had other than the stuff?
Yeah, I was hoping to get clarification about the backyard, but it sounds like that's where you want it to be reduced. So we were generally hesitant to use numerical values unless the board is insistent, but we can say, you mentioned 10 to 15% reduction.
I was just
grading.
that was more of an indication of a slight reduction. I didn't mean to use numerics, but I was quantifying it just as.
But we're
not looking for a I was not looking
putting
for
it in terms we might use. We would shrink the size of the flat pads that are being put into the ravine bottom, and ultimately that would hopefully lower the heights of the highest retaining walls. So a general shrinking and lowering of retaining walls, leading to the reduction in grading.
I might be at the minority on this one because I didn't quite hear my colleague's response on it. In general, the garden walls that were and so the garden walls that were created last time at the previous project that was approved, and there were I
I think it was the phone. When you picked up the phone and closed your phone, Amelia, your telephone, it stopped earlier.
It's something in this box back here.
No. The office phone that's in front of you. That didn't do it.
I know, it's when I
Good
picked it
try,
up to
though.
call them to see.
It's very.
Here, I'll kick it.
Let me see if they.
No.
It's hot.
Oh,
it works.
There you go.
Okay,
There you
great,
go.
thank you.
It's hot. It's tired.
Okay,
And
Wants to
thank
so-
you. No, so it seems like it's a technical issue that they're trying to figure out, so.
It's the decision alarm.
Well, I'm just going to talk through it anyways. My interpretation insofar as the backyard, in that the retaining walls are following the contours of the existing terrain, it's nestling the hillside, and it's also kind of creating a backyard that's really not visible to the neighbors. Those are all positive. Insofar as the comment that you made, Mr. Charchin, in reducing the grading cubic yards, and you said 10 to 15%, if we're saying, okay, 10 or 15% off the proposed cut number as depicted on the color diagram, is one thing, and then as Mr. Platt is getting into, well, where does that occur? And so,
I really don't care where it occurs. I just want a little bit less cut.
what are you trying to solve, though? And so if the idea just to say, well, we're cutting it just to appease somebody, then that's one thing. But if I have an objective in mind, I could try to better answer the question that Mr. Platt is trying to put forward, which is, what do you do?
It's just a reduced grading. I mean, in general, we try to keep projects as close to 1,500 square feet as possible. If there's an opportunity to do that here, I think we should make that something that staff can look at. And we don't need to position it with a 15% number. That was just my way of stating that I think there should be a reduction in grading, a slight reduction in grading, or small reduction in grading.
So to answer your question, Mr. Platt, it doesn't seem like there's a consensus as to where that reduction should occur.
Well, it's at the rear rather than at the two-story wing
Right.
on the hillside.
Right.
So. Okay. We can work with that.
Okay. Now, going to staff conditions, to step the second story of the two-story east wing and the second-level bridge back from the first story consistent with topography, is that something that you have consensus on?
It doesn't bother me. I don't know about Mr. Simonian.
I'm in the same boat. It doesn't
There's
bother
no
me.
support for staff condition number 1. Modify the pool and associated decks to follow the topography.
I think that kind of
That really is the grading
Dovetails
question.
into the grading
the general condition.
All right.
We'll eliminate the condition about the second level, and we'll revise that condition to make it read closer to reducing the grading. So.
And I have a clarification. So that bridge that was proposed before, that's not being proposed. That's completely out of.
Well, I used the word bridge. There was a bridge before that was spanning the kind of ravine bottom that I assume drainage would have come down below. When I mentioned the bridge, it was the second floor walkway, basically functions like a bridge.
But what somebody from the audience was, the previous subdivision parcel map, in order to access from one side to another, I thought the civil engineer was referring to creating some sort of a bridge.
That's the previous proposal.
And so that's not.
That's not before us.
That's gone completely.
Right, that proposal is gone. And if I may clarify a couple of things, because some of these things came up in the discussion. One, we've checked the initial study. There is documentation that there is no mapped blue line stream on the site. The second thing that was mentioned, if this is one lot, it's one single lot for development purposes. And the third item that I'd like to mention, Board Member Simonian brought up the past parcel map. The two houses were, of course, separated, but there was going to be construction in between for driveways with retaining walls. So overall, the footprint of that disturbance of the land area was approximately similar to what's being proposed under this. In fact, probably this would cover a smaller construction area reduced construction area than the previous two houses. When you combine the two houses with the cul-de-sac and the associated driveways and all the land disturbances.
It's less disturbing.
So this is less disturbed.
So, in essence, does that parcel map just become null and void? And
it's been withdrawn already.
I see.
The applicant was applying to get the final map approved when this project was being proposed. That parcel map was withdrawn.
Okay.
So it's gone.
It was never recorded, finalized.
Okay, good. Then, thank you for those clarifications. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So additional conditions that were stated were that the requirements under the negative declaration for mitigation of the artifacts, I'd like to position that as a condition that that be followed, and also, I mean, it's standard,
It's
but
already part of it.
I know it's already part of it, but we want to just kind of highlight that we want to have there's a method to my madness, that we want to have the licensed archaeologist on site to document, and then I would make a consideration.
Wait, is it the whole time?
Just as the negative mitigation.
During grading and foundation
Is it
work?
during the entire grading, or is it if some paleontological item is discovered, then the job site needs to cease, and then you get a paleontologist involved to do the observation from that point?
Yeah, Chairman and Simonian, members of the board. Essentially, the mitigation measure states that anytime you're doing any ground disturbance activity, that you have an on-site monitor on the site at all times. And then if there is something discovered, then they got to stop work and kind of investigate that to see what that potential resource is.
Okay.
I mean, that's already part of the requirement.
Correct.
The reason I wanted to highlight it is so that we can consider my consideration, which is that a report be provided to the Brand Library. I think that'd be very appropriate. But that would be a consideration.
Based on the findings of the on-site monitor?
Mhm.
Even if they're like nothing?
Yeah, even if they're nothing. I mean,
Okay.
it's not a condition, it's a recommendation, consideration. So they could do with that, they could do with that whatever they want. But because it was a suggestion from from the community, I thought that was a good one. It's a really non-issue as far as building. Anything else?
Well, in fact, if I may clarify, the first mitigation measure requires that any written reports be provided to the city's planning department, city's historic preservation commission, and the City of Glendale Public Library special
Perfect.
collections. It's already in
Covered.
the mitigation measures.
Perfect.
So, but it wouldn't hurt to add a condition, let's say, to reference or as a reminder of the mitigation measures.
That's what we're going to.
That's a good idea.
But this was discussed already.
With that, I'll take a motion.
Okay.
I move.
Is there a first?
I move to approve the project with conditions as stated.
And I second that.
Call for
So
a roll
we
call.
have a motion and a second with conditions.
I'll request a roll call vote.
Roll call. Board Member Simonian,
Yes.
Board Member Bellion,
Yes?
and Chairman Chartian.
Chair Pro Tem Church.
Chair Pro Tem. Sorry.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. Do we have a quorum?
Yes, we do. We have a quorum because we would have a quorum if we were 5 or if we were 4, because there's 3.
I see 3.
Yes, we would have quorum under out of 5 is usually 3, because it's a majority plus 1.
Okay.
And even if we had 4, which is what our condition is now, we have 3, which is more than 50% plus 1.
Oh. Wait, I'm sorry. We can't hear you.
You can
at
ask me.
the
You can ask me
so
after the meeting.
We can actually address any questions after the meeting for sure. So.
Okay. There's no more minutes to approve. So
Is there a
I'll-
motion to adjourn?
I'll
I
entertain a motion
move
to adjourn.
to adjourn.
Second.
And the meeting closes at 8:45 p.m.